Okay, the time is now 5:01 p.m. And good evening and welcome to the October 22nd, 2024 Policy and Governance Committee meeting. I'm Jonathan Briggs, Chair of the committee and District 2 Board Member. It brings me great pleasure to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting, and I look forward to our work tonight. We're going to move on to roll call. So Ms. Adelaide, please call the roll.
Mr. Briggs,
Present.
Dr. Miller,
Present.
Ms. Walker, Ms. Booth-Estrada,
Present.
Mr. Jackson. 3 present, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Adelaide. We're going to now move on to item 1.3, adoption of the meeting agenda. Please be advised that to accommodate our visiting speakers, the order of the agenda will vary slightly. So the agenda item 4.3, policy 6153 field trips, will be considered after agenda item 3.1, blueprint implementation update. If there are no objections, the committee shall adopt the October 22nd, 2024 meeting agenda as amended. Okay, hearing none. There being no objections, the October 22nd, 2024 meeting agenda is adopted as amended. I'm now going to move on to item 1.4, approval of the committee meeting minutes. So if there are no corrections, the committee shall approve the September 24th, 2024 meeting minutes as distributed. And there being no corrections, the September 24th, 2024 meeting minutes are approved. We're now going to move on to item 2.0, and I do want to just pause and recognize that our ex officio member, the chair of the board, has joined us as well. And so just saying good evening.
Thank you. I'm a voting member of this one, actually. You get more of me in this one.
Oh, okay. So we're now on item 2.0, public comment on agenda and non-agenda items. Registered public comment speakers can be live, pre-recorded using video, audio, or written. There is one registered live public comment this evening, and that's from Ms. Teresa Smith, individual speaking on policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process. So Ms. Adelaide, and she is in the waiting room. Great. We can let Ms. Smith in. Don't see her.
I am sending the link to her, the invitation to be promoted to panelist. I'm not sure if she's declining it.
Okay, let me give her another 30 seconds. Yeah, because I see her as an attendee. So, Ms. Smith, if you're, well, I'm assuming you can hear us, but you would need to accept the invitation that would pop up on the Zoom screen for you to be promoted to a panelist. So you should see that as opposed to rejecting it. Okay, we're gonna give it another 30 seconds and then we're gonna move forward. But we do welcome if you want to submit written comment, Ms. Smith. We can take that in the event that we can't hear your testimony verbally. But we're going to try for another 30 seconds or so. Ms. Adelaide, any updates? Is she still rejecting it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So we aren't going to be able to hear Mrs. Smith, Ms. Smith's presentation unless we may actually be able to postpone this piece of the item and then come back to it if she in the next 2 minutes or so is able to join. And then we will move on to the introduction of the blueprint piece, which is item 3.0. And if Ms. Smith is able to accept that, then we'll pivot back to that. So we're gonna move on to legislative agenda, and we're gonna go to item 3.1, blueprint implementation update. The chair recognizes Mrs. Welsh to introduce her presenter, Dr. Kara Libby, for the blueprint implementation update.
Good evening. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Kara Libby and her team here this evening, so she can provide us with an update on the blueprint. She was here last year a couple times, and we had actually even asked her near the end of last year if she could come, and she said, well, nothing really specifically had changed, but that if we wait until this time this year, that she would be able to give us an update. So we are fortunate to have her here. So I will let her introduce herself and her team.
Good afternoon, Kyra Libby, and Strategic Initiatives Director and Blueprint Coordinator for Prince George's County. This evening, I have Dr. Wade with me. She's one of my project managers and assists me with Blueprint and everything else. And we also have an external partner with us. And I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Tara Bergfeld. I am with WestEd. Nice to meet you all.
We do have a PowerPoint presentation.
Would you like for me to share, or you would like to share?
If you could share, please. Yeah, I'm not multi-talented like that. Thank you. So, of course, update on Blueprint for Maryland's Future. Next slide, please. And our wonderful Board of Education. Okay, now we're going to give you a quick status. So in 2023, we submitted our first Blueprint plan. It was more like, I call it the baseline. The Accountability and Implementation Board, the State Government Oversight Committee for Blueprint for across the state, wanted to know, what do we want to know from each of the local school systems in terms of this Blueprint implementation based on the law? So the first iteration of our Blueprint plan in 2023 was about 200 pages, and it was like, okay, Pillar 1, early childhood, Pillar 2, career ladders, Pillar 3, college and career readiness, Pillar 4, more resources for students, and then Pillar 5, the accountability. What will that look like? We fast forward to 2024, and we call it the AIB, the Accountability and Implementation Board. Now they have a better handle on what they are looking for in terms of the blueprint and what the school systems need to report on. So the second blueprint plan that was created, developed in 2024 was in two parts. The first part was a systemic response. It asked the local school systems to talk about the district's goals, vision, strategic plan, our communication plan to stakeholders. And it asked, oh, am I muted? Oh, I'm back. Our 3 top challenges. And it asked for us to progress monitor. How are we going to address our challenges? And of course, the board members assisted us with that systemic response in March 2024. Part 2 was when the AIB said, okay, now we're going to delve into the 5 pillars. Everything the school system reported on in 2023 is almost like, now what are you going to do about it? How are you going to do it? And then what are the challenges thus far to implement this blueprint? So in May 2024, we completed the 5 pillars. We pulled together part 1 and part 2. We sent our revisions in July 2024. and we received our final approval for our blueprint plan in September 2024. And of course, on the slide, you'll see the link to our plan. And then also, as you all are so wonderful that you always do, you promote our website. So that's our link to our website. And we also have the plan in Spanish and French on our website. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this year, the AIB, through surveys, asking the blueprint coordinators and others, what do we need to do to help to implement this? We said we need help. We need partners. We need those experts in the field that are going to help us to implement per pillar. So this school year, Prince George's County Public Schools, we have 5 partners. We have a partner to talk about pre-K expansion in the private providers, and that partner is helping us now to look to see what they can do to assist us with the private providers. We have a partner, CityWorks DC, that is helping us with our career counseling, because there are career counselors in all middles and high schools. And we have a partner, HCM Strategist, to help us with college and career readiness in those pathways. And we also have NCEE, who will assist us with our career ladder. Our partners have just started to assist us and to talk about the scope of work and to figure out how they will assist Prince George's County with the implementation of Blueprint through each of those areas. Now, what is really important, and I said something several times to the AIB, we need assistance with resource allocation. What does it look like in terms of Blueprint and the budget? And that is where WestEd and Ms. Tara have joined us this evening, because this is where it's going to be important for all stakeholders to know what's coming within the next year or two on how the allocation is going to look different and how the funding follows the student. So I'm going to turn it over to Tara so she can talk about our partnership with WestEd and resource allocation.
Thank you, Dr. Libby. Good evening. My name is Tara Bergfeld. I am a Senior Education Finance Associate on the Strategic Resource Allocation and Systems Planning team at WestEd. My team provides technical assistance to and research on behalf of states and school districts on topics related to school funding for education, accountability systems, and systems alignment specifically. WestEd is a very large organization. I am a part of one team that specializes in school finance. I am very excited to be leading the work to support Prince George's County Public Schools in the planning and implementation of the resource allocation and strategic budget area of the Maryland Blueprint. I've been at WestEd for almost 3 years. Prior to this, I was the Director of Resource Strategy for Metro Nashville Public Schools, where I directed the implementation of our district's student-based budgeting system. And for many years prior to that, I worked for the Tennessee Comptroller's Office. I supported our state legislature on issues related to school funding and policy. As a part of this work, our team is assisting the district in evaluating their current budget and expenditures as they align with the requirements of the Blueprint, specifically around minimum funding requirements at the school level. For example, in the aggregate, the district must allocate at least 75% of funds to the school site level. So we are supporting in the analysis to determine how many schools are receiving that required minimum funding and how many will require additional resources and in what area. Following this analysis, I'm so sorry. I'm working from home this afternoon and my child just walked in the door. I'm so sorry. Cooper, please. Give me a few more minutes, please. Please go on out for a second. I am so sorry. It's late where I am or later. Sorry. Following this part of the analysis, we are going to support the team in developing data visualization and other materials such as talking points and one-pagers to support you in communicating about the budget priorities with both internal and external partners. With this work will come supporting the development of a community engagement plan to facilitate ongoing resource allocation and planning conversations. Do we have any questions yet?
And I think, Ms. Bergfeld, I think we'll probably just hold all of the questions
Okay.
at the end. Yeah.
Perfect.
just
I
for-
only have 2 more slides.
Okay, great.
So as Dr. Libby said, we really just started kicking off this work together, probably really full steam the last couple of weeks. We've met with the finance office first to understand the current processes for allocating centralized versus school level costs. And over the next month, we are going to conduct our analysis of the minimum funding requirements, as I mentioned on the previous slide, and identify where resource shifts need to occur. To do this, we are going to meet with program teams, including the school-based budgeting office, to understand how resources are allocated for specific program and student needs, such as English learners and students with disabilities, among others. Following this initial assessment period, we are going to draft recommendations for changes to the SBB formula, as well as any other potential shifts in the district's multi-year budget plan based on blueprint requirements. Because any changes to the SBB formula can have an impact on school budgets, we are going to work with your teams to develop guidance for principals so that they understand what is changing and why. And lastly, in the spring, as I mentioned, we're going to assist with communication of all of these changes to the Board of Education and the County Council, as well as families, staff, and the public. And next slide, please. So what are the anticipated outcomes of this work together? First, we are going to see changes in the way that your district allocates resources. The law requires a minimum funding level by school. Our work together will help inform the development of the FY26 budget that will get more schools closer to this threshold. And I don't have this on the slide. It's still a bit amorphous, but we also really want to support the team to think about not only how to implement the blueprint compliance requirements. A lot of this is accounting, showing how some central costs are allocated out to the schools, but really about how to actualize the spirit of the law. We don't want to shift around resources on paper only. We don't want it to just make the accounting look like resources are going to certain schools, just changing the way we're, cost coding something. We truly want to resource schools and children the way that they need it the most. And to do this fully, it really is going to take more than one budget cycle. This isn't going to happen overnight. The formula as it's structured requires some segmenting of costs. So for example, we have this program for English learner students and this amount of funding for this interventionist, but we don't want to think about instructional interventions in these funding silos. We really want to help you think about how you can serve multiple student groups that are not just defined by how the funding is flowing to them. So we plan to support the district in processes to separate out the funding from the programming. From an implementation and student needs standpoint, we're going to do this by offering opportunities to engage with other school districts that we are supporting in blueprint implementation, as well as connecting with some content level experts at WestEd around specific programming. And I touched on these actions that are outlined on the slide in the previous slide, but again, anticipated outcomes from our engagement together will include adjustments to the district's SBB formula to align with blueprint requirements, updated guidance that will complement those changes, and communication support to make sure that those who are impacted understand the how and the why about the changes that we've made and still plan to make to align with the Maryland Blueprint. That is my presentation for today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to confirm that that's the end of the presentation for everyone. Okay, great.
Yes.
So board members, the floor is now open for discussions. I'll recognize you in the order of your raised hand. And we'll start with Vice Chair Miller.
Good evening. First, let me just say thank you, Dr. Libby. I know you've been working tirelessly, you and your team, on this, and each time you have delivered for our school system. So I just want to start by just saying thank you. Putting us as leaders in this work, really appreciate it. And then also leading the charge with saying, hey, here's how we need help with the partnerships, so that we know, this is a joint effort for our community, and you just stepping forward and doing that is commendable. So I just want to say thank you for that, and thank your team on our behalf for that as well. The part that I grapple with is probably a question for Tara from Wested. And see, here's another place where you got to partner, because there are things that we're going to have to do different, where you talked about separating the funding from the program, so you're looking at how it's following the student, which is going to be totally different as to how we've looked at funding for since I've been in education. What my question is about, when we have funding, so you have a school that's probably Title I, CSI, then you got Blueprint funds. So when you come to adding those federal funds in, then you might have Title I, Title II in there. How do we ensure, and maybe this is something that we're still working on, because I know Title I looks at the program, but the Blueprint is looking at the student. What supports do you think would have for principals in order to help navigate that complicated formula?
Sure, that's a really good question and a really good point. You're right. Title I does look at programming, but I think it is still possible to look less about what the funding dictates for what is an allowable use of a program, and think more globally about how to serve students in a school building. Less about allowable use, more about need first, and then find the funding source that will allow that program. I think typically we look at funding source dictating the program, and maybe we kind of try and flip that around a bit. We want to look at the ideal programs that would serve students in that building, and then find the funding streams that make sense by blending and braiding them together. And that's where the strategy and the support is going to come in for principals when they're making their budgets.
Great, thank you so much. And we can always have a second round if there's additional pieces, Dr. Miller. We're going to move to Board Member Boozer Strother.
All right, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to Dr. Libby and the team. The piece about the moving towards the data visualization is just so right on target for the board. In our recent retreat, we had identified that as a priority for this year, that we could really explain to our stakeholders and to the county council these blueprint escalations and exactly, the benefits and impact that they'll have on our students. So really happy about that alignment. And then the second piece, Ms. Bergfeld, and that you presented on the where we're headed with SBB and the needs assessments driving the decisions around the expenditures. And I know that principals have been, the blueprint is a heavy lift on principals. At some of our high concentration of poverty schools with over 1,000 students, as I've described, that this is like having a $2 million social service organization now in your building, but you haven't been able to hire any staff to actually be that social service organization. So I think what I'm really looking for is, will the principals be able to drive the staffing needs based on the outcomes they're expected? And I know absent, improving attendance rates is a really big one, and that we need more social workers in the building. So if you can speak to that flexibility on that portion of the follow the student pillar 4, I would appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. And I just want to clarify the timer, is that for me as well to answer? Okay. So honestly, that is a policy decision within the district around how much flexibility principals have around those staffing decisions, that you all can kind of philosophically approach. Staffing and filling those vacancies is a challenge. It's one thing to get a big pot of money. It's another to be able to strategically use it if you can't hire folks. And so finding ways to support principals when they perhaps can't fill a position and finding other ways to utilize those funds, that may be where the guidance can come in as well.
Perfect timing. You really took that to heart. So thank you for that. You know, and if there are other questions, we can do a second round, but I did have a question for you, Ms. Bergfeld. And I'm really just thinking about this from kind of the outward facing piece where there are members of the public that are watching this, people who aren't ed policy wonks or who aren't really super clear about how school budgets work, who may be wanting to understand more about student-based budgeting. And I think you've kind of gone over it at a very high level, which I think is helpful. But I was just curious, like when you talked about like braiding and blending funds and funding streams, what would be I'm making an assumption that like the goal is to get the most out of the dollar that exists, but if you could just explain that more for people who are really lay and they're like wanting to understand why is this, you know, something that we're using our time and our energy towards doing, that would really be helpful to me.
Sure, that's a great question. So school systems are funded with lots of different revenue streams, state, federal, local, they're all coming in, and many of them have requirements on how you spend the dollars. Federal funds specifically, you know, there's a lot of reporting required. It must be used. It is calculated based on a certain formula, such as Title I, based on economically disadvantaged students, and it must be used for XYZ for those students. And then you have to report up how you spend those dollars. Similarly now, you know, the Blueprint has its own spending requirements through the funding formula. Money is coming in based on student inputs, and it must be spent in a certain way. So there's lots of spending requirements on school districts around how they structure their programs. Blending and braiding are terms that are used for how you maximize all of the resources that are coming into your school system. It's not just keeping all of your funds segmented. Oh, think of it as, you know, sometimes there's a grant and it has a very specific purpose. It is given to you to do this particular thing. But with all of this pool of money that's coming in between Blueprint, federal funds, and others, we want to maximize them. We want to use the most restrictive funds first, like Title I. They have requirements for how you must spend those dollars, but perhaps, you know, you could boost that program by stacking more dollars on top of it from the Blueprint. The term braiding comes into play because when you're literally looking at a braid, like 3 different strings, you know, braided together in the image, it means that they retain their funding source for reporting requirements. They don't get lost all in this big pot of money. Blending is when you are able to blend multiple revenue sources together and the reporting is kind of less defined as during braiding. There are some consolidation options for school districts around how they blend and braid funds at the school level that we could talk about for some guidance for, you know, your team, for the fiscal part of the team on that. But for a high level, blending and braiding is really just maximizing all the funding that comes in, knowing how it can be used, and using the most restrictive funds first so that you can deplete those and then stack others on top.
Thank you. That was, and it almost created a visual in at least in my mind. So really appreciate you sharing that. And it sounds like what I'm hearing is this will be able to be an opportunity to really stretch the dollar. If there's $10 per student, then you can get the most out of that $10 that exists by having you all on board. So thank you so much for all of that. Board members, are there any committee members? Are there any additional questions for Dr. Libby, for Ms. Bergfeld or other folks on the call? Okay. Well, we want to say thank you, and it was really quick and easy, and thanks for taking the time, and no problem at all having your child come into the, it made it very human, so we appreciate it, and we're very grateful that we were blessed with his very, very quick presence. So with that being said, we are going to move to the next portion. We're going to go back for a second to public comment because we do have Ms. Smith on the line now. She was having some tech issues, and then we're going to move forward. But want to say thank you to Dr. Libby and team for joining us. We really appreciate it, and feel free to stay on or to leave. And so we're going to go now to the registered public comment. Again, registered public comment speakers can be live, pre-recorded using video, audio, or written. As I mentioned, there's one registered live public comment this evening, and that is Ms. Teresa Smith, who's an individual speaking on policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process. So I am going to turn it over to Ms. Smith, who's joining in a second.
Chair Briggs, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did see, I think Dr. Libby was trying to get the mic there for a second.
Thanks for that. We'll remove each other. Yes, Dr. Libby.
Sorry, I was getting ready to leave. So I just want to say that's why we're partnering with WestEd. And then also more to come. And the current blueprint plan, it's like 100 pages. But if you want to read anything in the plan, go to Pillar 5 and read Pillar 5 and read question 23. That's really going to give you an in-depth response of how we're going to move forward with this blueprint and budgeting. And plus, PGCPS was one of 7 that had question 23 approved the first time around.
Ooh, all right. I wish we had the little celebration emoji that we could use, but we can just do it in voice. So thank you so much for that.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, and we're going to welcome Ms. Smith for her public comment on policy 4113. Okay, so she's having some tech issues again. So hopefully we'll give it 30 seconds and can be patient, practice some patience.
Chair
Okay.
Briggs, she was having
She'll just be written. Yeah, I saw that. Sorry.
tech issues.
Okay, great. So we appreciate you making the time, Teresa, and we look forward to your written statement. So we're now going to move on to item 4.0, and we're going to go to item 4.3, which will be policy 6153 field trips. I recognize Mrs. Welsh to introduce her presenter, Mr. Philip Hughes, for the update on policy 6153 field trips.
Good evening. So I wanted to just backtrack for a second on field trips because at the last, when we met, I think it was August, and we discussed field trips, there were bits and pieces of information that you wanted to have answers to. And so in September, then I met with Phil, actually was the instigator behind this group meeting, but we had all these players that we met across the schools, the area offices and everything to discuss the field trips and issues that were coming up on the field trips. And Phil, who is our director, Phil Hughes, he's our director of risk management. He actually provided some excellent information in terms of the whole process for how we even determine what is a viable trip and what isn't in terms of liability. So I asked him if there'd be any chance he'd come and share that same information with all of you because I thought it was quite interesting. So I'm not going to talk anymore for this moment, but I'll let Phil go ahead and talk a little bit about the field trips.
And good evening, and thank you for having me. So Robin wanted me to talk about really the role of risk management as it relates to student field trips. We are a field trip approver along with the associate superintendent, principal, and ID. Once we've been made aware of a field trip, the first thing my office does or that I do is really we do a risk assessment. We want to determine if the field trip is safe or how can we mitigate any kind of risk or hazard as it relates to that field trip. That involves several factors. Certainly goes into the investigation of the vendor, maybe talking to my counterparts in other LEAs, meeting with the vendor, and actually really going on site to see exactly what the field trip entails and provide recommendations and suggestions in order to mitigate risk or increase the safety of that trip. The second thing that we really want to do is look at the liability waiver. In the days today, a lot of these vendors are trying to transfer their risk back onto PGCPS, and more importantly to our parents and our students. And if you read a lot of the waivers, you'll find that what the vendors want to do is transfer their risk even when they're negligent. And so we can't have our families, signing away their obligation or signing away their ability to seek indemnification in case their child is hurt as a result of the negligence or liability of that vendor. So we work with the Office of General Counsel to make amendments to that waiver to provide it back to the vendor in order to make that waiver more neutral. Certainly, if one of our children damages something on their site, they're going to expect us to pay for it. And certainly we expect them to take on their liability if due to their negligence, one of our students is harmed. And then, the other things that we really try to do, again, is all around about the safety of our students. Again, making sure that we're doing a proper investigation to ensure that the trip is safe. We are, and right now we are putting together a list of approved trips. We think that will help speed up the time in which a school will need in order to get the field trip approved. But certainly, if I'm aware of the vendor, I'm aware of the field trip. It is a low risk field trip. Normally they have my signature within 15 minutes to 24 hours. And so we really try to turn those things around. It's really when we're not aware of the trip, we don't know what the activities are. I'm unfamiliar with the vendor. That it does take a little bit more time to ensure that trip is safe. I'll give you one example. If our kids are going out to the boat, we're going to request the vendor to provide their Coast Guard inspection. We're going to require that the vendor provide that the captain has a valid license. We're going to ask for the float plan. We're going to ensure that they have life vests for that meet all sizes of children. We're going to want to know what the communication and the emergency plans. And so we go through that analysis just to make sure that the trip is safe and is suitable for our kids, regardless of the age.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. So thank you so much, Mr. Hughes, for that presentation. And we'll now turn it over to board members. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hands. I'll recognize you in the order of your raised hand. We're going to start with Chair of the Board, Walker. You are muted, or I think your volume might be really low. You're unmuted.
Oh, thank you so much. I didn't know if they wanted to go through this document first. I'm happy to have you guys go through that document. No problem.
No, that's okay.
Oh, okay. So what? No worries. So one of the questions I was going to ask, thank you very much. I was wondering if you, and I think you might even be about to answer it. I was wondering if you document the hazards or the concerns, because as others want to attempt to do a field trip, they could just take a look at that and see what the concerns were in order to help out prior to you getting them.
So I don't necessarily document the hazards or the concerns. We will not approve a field trip unless those hazards or concerns have been addressed. We won't approve a field trip unless the liability waiver meets our legal sufficiency. And so the next school that comes behind us, comes behind that one, it can be automatically approved because we've already done the legwork up front.
Yes. Is there a checklist? So for instance, I guess I would know if I wanted to take my scholars on a boating trip that there will be some clear precautions for it. Is there somewhere I can go and say, if it's a boating trip or anything to deal with water, then here's a checklist to make sure that at least when you get it, you can do less work? Or is that something that you feel that you don't need at this time because of the waiver or anything else that you already have?
I don't necessarily need a checklist because each individual trip is different. And so, you know, if it's an environmental trip, we found that those that are doing environmental trips, they've been doing this for a really long time. And so the safety is much higher than, you know, maybe some other that may be new to being a vendor. And so, but we treat them all the same. I'm still gonna go out on that boat with them. I'm still going to see what the kids are actually going to be doing. I'm still going to talk about when they're on the boat, see what their safety protocols are. We're going to make sure that the captain and the shipmates are first aid, CPR, and water rescue license. And so we're doing all those things. And so sometimes a checklist may pigeonhole you into certain things where when I'm there, and that's why we want to meet with the vendors, because we actually want to see what's going on. Certainly I start that by going online, looking them up, may even go into DLLR to see if they're licensed or if they're in good standings. But from there, really getting a good gauge on what they're going to do, how serious they are about safety is really in the conversation that I'm having with the vendor.
Thank you so much. Very thorough. Thank you.
There are other questions? Okay. I did have just a really quick question, Mr. Hughes, and this was more on the, like, when you get to the last domino. So if you're visualizing 10 dominoes, the last one is like the impact of everything that led up to that last domino. And perhaps it's like a delay in field trips or fewer field trips because of different reasons. And that's what we heard from the community, was that there was concerns about post-COVID, you know, having fewer field trips. And I was just curious with some of the pieces that you mentioned in the earlier phases, like the approved vendor list. Is that a list that, like, is PGCPS holding on to people? Let's say that there was like a boating trip 5 years ago that was initially an approved vendor. And I know things can change with businesses, so you still want to stay in compliance or consider liability. But is there like a list where it's like you all are kind of holding on to that information and providing it to schools? And then the second question was like, is there a way of collecting information in advance from schools around potential field trips so that a lot of that vetting process can happen before it gets to like any delays in field trips happening?
So if I can answer the second question first, certainly when I'm talking to the school field trip coordinators or the community coordinators, my conversation to them is that if you're unsure when you're thinking about a field trip, let me know. Let's have this conversation, because as soon as I'm aware of it, as soon as I can jump on it, and again, it takes time to do a lot of these things. Certainly when you're talking about boating and they're thinking about it in the winter months, the boats don't go out in the winter, so you have to kind of wait to the spring, which compresses time. So again, as soon as I'm aware of it, then that's when I act on it. The second question is that we are creating a subcommittee of stakeholders from all around PGCPS, so we can put a list together of approved activities, and then that list will go out on a bulletin each and every year. It will give us the flexibility then for that group to come together every year, go through that list and update that list, whether we want to add activities or delete those activities for various reasons.
Okay, got it. And I might email you offline with some additional pieces. I think I don't want to belabor some of the questions, but I really appreciate your response there. Are there other questions? All right. Oh, okay. It looks like Chair of the Board Walker has one more question.
No, I was just going to remind you to please put it in the tracker. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, please.
All right. Yeah, we know you're about process, and I appreciate that. So, okay, I will put that question in the tracker, and hopefully Reveal, you also heard that, just in case I forget. We want to say thank you, Mr. Hughes, for joining us this evening for the presentation. It's really helpful because I feel like this was something that we were wanting to know more about. So your expertise on the process has been really helpful to clarify some things. And as with the other presenters, feel free to stay on if you want to, or you can also head to your life and whatever you have going on this evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So you might want to just stay on until we get through the field trip policy in case anything comes up that they have a question that you might want to answer. Because we're going to talk about the policy itself for just a few seconds. So
Certainly.
and then you can hang up. I'm sorry, but you're here, so I hate that lose you if you're here and we have a question that comes up. So at our August meeting, there were questions. One of the questions had to do with, could we get could we find out what trips the schools went to last year? So, the area offices, each of them had sort of a spreadsheet, and that they were totally different from each other. So it's not like the data was, the same data from across each group, as well as community schools also did a field trip. So it was pretty difficult to read. And so I only was able to, Area 1 actually did sort of simplify it for us. And that's what you have, Cindy, that you can show them. So you can see what, that's all the elementary schools. And if you look, you can see the names of the schools and the types of trips that they went on throughout the year. Can you like scroll down, Cindy, like so they can just. I think that last number was, I'm looking at it, was what, 601? So, 651. So about 650 elementary trips that happened last year. Unfortunately, it wasn't collected by school. It was just all put together in one thing, but it gives you at least an idea of what was happening in elementary school level, as well as the types of trips. The most of them, I looked through them, most of them were pretty academically oriented types of trips that connected to the curriculum. Then I was able to, for cluster, it was a cluster 7 and 8, which picks up your K-8 and your middle schools. I was able to sort of be able to count per school, and schools went from as low as 16 trips in a year up to 53 trips in a year. So that gave you at least the range of what that group of schools did. I could not decipher high school, and the middle and the community schools, they actually went on a total of 430 trips. And I think, and talking to people, that one of the things was that that people wanted to know why the community schools get to go on so many trips compared to the other schools. But part of that is all related to the blueprint and blueprint funding, because if you read in the law what a wraparound service is, one of the things that is considered wraparound services is off-site learning opportunities and educational field trips. So they're specifically saying you need to spend your money on these types of things because they're considered wraparound services. As far as the other question you had asked was the could we do a survey, and then you wanted to link to another survey instead of sending out a separate survey. And so the cultural survey was going to be coming out, and so I did contact that office back in August, and unfortunately, the cutoff for adding any questions to that survey was July 1. So we had missed that. They already had their survey questions ready to go, so we missed that opportunity. However, they liked the idea of adding some questions about the field trips, so they took all the information because they plan to add some questions in when they do their cultural survey next year about field trips, so we might be able to get more information. Additionally, the area offices have said that they intend to have one uniform way of collecting the data on who's going on what field trips. So what I did do, though, was in terms of the language, so in our meeting, I think when we talked to area offices, what I heard was a couple of people talking about the fact that sometimes I asked the question, I asked your questions that you had asked at the meeting, and that I asked the question about how long it takes, like, why would it take so long to get through the process? And area office said, well, a lot of times they, like in each of the schools, there's usually one person designated to get all the information together and send it out. And sometimes, and it might be like the assistant principal or someone, it depends on the school, but it might sit there for a while before it ever gets sent to the area office. And so with the school, the teachers especially might feel like that, well, I sent all this information in, but nothing's happening and the process is so long. Then I also talked to some schools and to people working within the schools, and CTE, who they do a lot of trips too. And they actually said, well, a lot of times, because the instructional director has to sign off, that they a lot of times will it'll get over to the area office, but because everything's paper, it's not electronic, so it's all just a clunk of paper. They have to be able to catch that instructional director when they show up in the building to say, hey, can you sign off on this field trip? Which, when you think about it, is pretty cumbersome, but just because, there's a million other things that might be going on. And then you have this stack of these field trips that you're supposed to try to grab the instructional director and get them to do it. So I did put, Cindy, if you'll put up the field trip policy a minute, and because I did make a couple changes based on this information. So if you scroll down, and I highlighted it, these are all things that were there before, but if you scroll down to, I think it's page 4. Here, the administrative approval, and we also went step by step across all the forms that have to be completed, and I could not see any one that was a waste of time, because they're all related. They're either there to help this school by giving them sample permission slips, things like that, so they actually try to make it easier for the school. And the issue of the only thing I did know is that you don't have to have all the information about all your students. You do need to have a sense of how many students when you start off with the trip. But by the end of the trip, by the time you're ready to go, you better know exactly who these students are and all their contact information in case something happens on the trip that you have to get a hold of the parents, as well as you need to know that information up front to figure out how many chaperones you need. But what I did, so that's why I said the approval process needs to address all the necessary requirements. However, the process for implementation must be automated. So I feel like they're going to be working on the administrative procedure. That's what, in fact, they'll be coming back probably in another 30 days or something with a revised administrative procedure. And one of the things that is going to need to happen is they have to put it in an electronic type of form so that you could go in, like the ID could go in and sign, or it's not a big deal for the assistant principal, whatever, to send the stuff over, because you're just sending it electronically. So either way, it should speed up the process significantly, and it doesn't get stuck in someone waiting for the person to show up to sign off on something. So I did add that language, and then because the data that has been collected, and I think it's because they've not really been required, community schools keeps the names and numbers and specific information, and that's probably because for funding purposes, you need to be able to demonstrate what you use for those funds and for the blueprint. But if you scroll down, Cindy, to the end where it says the implementation responsibilities, I did add this other language, which goes to the whole idea of keeping data on what field trips schools are going on. And I said the superintendent will provide an annual report which will include a summary data for all approved and denied trips, to include school area, cluster, grades, specific designations, community schools, example, Title I, and location of trip. And because their area offices are in the process of revising that so that they have uniformity across all 3 areas, I think this is the perfect time for them then to begin that process so that the superintendent can provide you an annual report. So those were basically the 2 revisions that I included in an effort to address your concerns about the process, and also having the information about what trips the schools are going on.
Thanks so much, Mrs. Welsh, for that walkthrough. We'll now turn it over to board members. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. All right. See any questions? And I just want to make a comment, and maybe Mrs. Welsh, you can take this under consideration. But for the denied trips and the approved trips, if we could just have like the reason, because I feel like if there's some way to code, like, you know, if it's like there didn't have liability reasons, or, you know, funding, or there was some other piece there. The other thing I just want to mention is, like, I had a conversation with, and I think I talked about this already during the last time we talked about field trips, but there was a teacher and there was like a parent advocate that talked about the coordination with the buses. I'm not sure if Mr. Hughes knows this process, but apparently, like, in order to secure the buses, you have to have a certain amount of chaperones and some other things like cleared. It seems like there's like an approval piece. And if you don't have that within a certain amount of time, then they lose the opportunity to get the bus because they couldn't get things clarified. So there was like a timing issue where the trips weren't happening because they had to like have this process that exists. I'm not sure if that's ringing a bell for you, but just wanted to mention that as a okay. And Mrs. Welsh, I know you looked into this. So otherwise, yeah.
No, I would just say, Chair Briggs, that there could be if in fact there's a delay on people either signing and sending forward, or ones that receive signing, and so the information is just sitting there, and the school had already started working to get their bus, but they could never confirm it because they didn't get any finalization. That might be part of the breakdown. I don't know. I don't know that for a fact. I'm just, you know, hypothesizing.
Yeah, so I would want to address that too, if that is an issue, just to get clarity on that last piece. Other questions? All right. Well, seeing no questions, if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend policy 6153 to the superintendent for revision approval. Okay, there being no objections, policy 6153 field trips will be recommended to the superintendent for revision approval. Thanks so much again, Mr. Hughes, for joining us this evening. And we're going to now move to item 3.2, legislative update. So I will now recognize Mrs. Welsh for the legislative update.
Okay. Cindy, do you mind putting it up on the screen, please? So as just a couple things. One is Shelby McRae, who works in my office, she did do all the design for the legislative platform. And so you'll get to see it now in its design form. There are some changes to it, minor changes. Well, one major change, but then the rest are minor. But I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to see this before it moves over to the board to vote on. So Cindy, if you'll scroll through this just gives you like the index, and of course the vision and mission of the school system and the Board of Ed. And if you scroll down, keep scrolling. And then a little bit about the Board of Education working with the superintendent, and of course the Policy and Governance Committee, and putting together the platform. And then of course the Office of Government Relations, which is under the superintendent. And then if you scroll further down, and then so these are the 4 areas of legislative priorities that we identified as areas that, of all the things we talked about, seem to be the most important. So, and this is your opportunity that if you think differently, you should absolutely, object and say, maybe it should be this, or maybe it should be that. But I will give you sort of the what this is saying. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'll say what it's saying basically, and then give you the rationale. And then, we can, maybe we stop there, Jonathan, at that point, just to have a conversation about that, and then move through the rest, because the rest will go pretty quickly, if you're okay with that.
Yep.
So, okay, so the first one is the implementation of the blueprint, and this actually was scattered through the document previously, where we had the whole conversation about the fact that we're not getting guidance from the AIB and MSD in time for what to meet the time frames or the deadlines for the requirements that we have to meet, and how that can be very problematic for the school system. and why it's important to that piece, as well as continued funding in numerous areas, because even though we have received tremendous amount of funding through the blueprint, the requirements are pretty significant, and oftentimes they are those types of requirements are not necessarily truly funded to the degree they need to be for us as a school system to meet those requirements. And so the board is advocating, this basically says that the board is advocating for guidance from the AIB and MSD regarding blueprint requirements be provided up to 18 months prior to the deadline for meeting the requirements, so that PGPA is able to make the necessary operational adjustments to comply with the requirements. And I think that every single chief had talked about that previously and about how critically important that piece was. The next one was school safety and security. And that in your, I want to say the September board meeting, the superintendent in his report to the board said that the highest priority for Prince George's County Public School is school safety and security. And he provided a lot of information at that point in time. And so because there's needs in a wide variety of areas in school safety, we put that in that particular area. Not in a wide variety of areas, like you have your active shooters and all the things that need to be in place to ensure that a school can be safe in a situation like that, and working also with law enforcement in terms of ensuring that they can respond immediately and know where to go. We have these funding grants that we have taken advantage of. They are going to continue, but we certainly need even more ability to fund more aspects as far as not just equipment or training, but even in terms of funding for staff. And so this basically said that PGCPS is seeking support for legislative measures that continue and expand the Safe to Learn Act grant funding for school building security measures, and to pay for staff to operate and monitor advanced security technology in the schools. So it's very similar to what was there previously when it was a section of its own under ongoing issues, but but we did put over to the priority area just because, quite honestly, if you don't have safe schools, none of the other stuff really matters, because parents want their children to be safe when they come to our schools, so that's critically important. And then the next one was the MSD literacy policy, which is an excellent policy. In fact, the state board just voted on it today and approved it, so it will be going into effect. And it has some very good components within the policy. The concerns, though, that and there is funding. In fact, they announced in a presentation today that the state had been awarded $40 million through ESEA funds to help support the implementation of this policy, and that they had already awarded $3.8 million to the schools to be able to this spring to be able to implement the policy. But saying that, though, I will say that we still have a lot of needs in our school system. We do not have. Right now we have 21 of our elementary schools don't have a designated point person who could be a coach providing the embedded job training where the coach would be working in the classroom with a classroom teacher to make sure that they're implementing the science of reading instruction in the right way. So even with the funding, and we used the grant fund, I did check on this, we've been using the grant funding to help support that, but we still are not covering all of our schools, as well as we're going to need additional funds to cover the costs of what they refer to as high quality instructional measures that the policy is requiring. And then the additional staff, in addition to coaches, there's language that talks about the fact that if in fact you're a student who's having a lot of difficulty basically unlocking the code and being able to read, then you might be in the need of intensive interventions, which then requires more staffing to be able to, because your classroom teacher there's also in the policy says you must have your core instruction. You can't take away time from core instruction to do interventions. So what that means is that you will need additional staff to be able to provide those types of interventions, or supplementary instruction. And although we have some reading specialists that do provide that, we don't have enough when you're thinking about all the elementary schools that we have in this county. So we are highly appreciative of the money that the school, that the the Blueprint has been providing, and the grant funding that they have received. However, for us, because we're such a large system, we have a lot of needs and a lot of work required in terms of working on literacy, that we are basically asking for continued funding for job embedded training, resources, and increased staffing. So it's really just to bring their attention to the fact that that we will need that, those additional resources. And then the last one is immunizations for students new to the US. So we basically, this past year, we had 4,000 newcomer students, and a newcomer student is defined as a student who was born outside of the United States and then recently has arrived in the country and is new to PGCPS. And so of those 4,000 newcomers, they for a lot of reasons, and just because you're new to the country and everything and trying to make your way and stuff, these students were not able to be immunized in time for them to be able to start school. And so when it was time to do the September 30th count for enrollment counts, which is what our funding is based on, the school system's funding, we basically, it resulted in at least, we lost about $70 million in funding that was, that we're going to now lose. It'll be cut across the Blueprint Pre-K funding, foundation and multi-learning programs, and impact to compensatory education and community school funding. So that's one piece of the puzzle. But then actually, even more importantly, is that these students are not having the opportunity to start school like all the other students, or even if they come in the middle of the year, there might be a gap in time before they can actually get into school because they didn't have their immunizations, which really is very problematic, because all the research shows, of course, that you must be in school to learn. And the more absences you have, the greater your chances are of not being successful. And so we want students to be able to start school right when school starts, and be in school all the time. So those were the four priority area. We read of what Chair Walker had provided to education leaders. And I know that she had referenced school safety and security as well as the literacy policy. So we incorporated those into the mix. And the Blueprint was based on, just because, our chiefs are very adamant that they really need to have the time to be able to implement what's required of them. And then this new information came to light related to the, I was just informed about last week, and we think that's pretty significant. We do have language back in the body of the platform under ongoing issues that talk about being able to access vaccines, so we can do our own vaccinations, but still doesn't cover the cost of everything. So what we're asking in the immunizations is really that they extend the day. Instead of 20 days, you have, like, if you come to school and you can show that within the next 20 days you have an appointment to get immunized, your child immunized, then you can start attending school. And we're just asking if they extend it to 45 days, so that we have additional, our parents of newcomers have additional time to get the vaccines. So that was the policies. Please, if you think we should have a different policy, you need to share at this point. If you think we should change anything, whatever, this is your opportunity to say what you'd like to see there.
See hands. So I'm gonna go with Vice Chair Miller, and then on deck is Chair Walker.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Welch. This looks really good. Mine is not really to change anything, because I can't see what we could substitute one for the other, but I also understand the challenge of going in with too many initiatives. However, we keep grappling with this thing about the teacher shortage, and they've done some work in terms of trying to make it our profession more accessible, but to give us to have some, or should I say, to look at the legislation and put some leeway so that we can be able to better attract teachers in Maryland to the profession. Don't know quite what that looks like, but I think that right now there's so many challenges to access good teachers, should I say, or should I say those who want to be teachers. So we have those paraprofessionals working in the classroom. There was time when we had funding from the, what is it called, federal government. We were able to get the paras into teaching. It was tough. Many of them didn't finish. And so now they're kind of like hanging. Is there something that can be done to make sure that we get these prospective teachers in the classroom? Plus pathways to licensure. And it could be something that's tied in with Blueprint, but I don't think Blueprint does a career ladder, but doesn't necessarily hit on pathway to licensure. And I think that's the path that I'm really trying to get some legislation around.
So last year, they actually did pass a couple bills that were really beneficial in terms of alternative pathways to become a teacher, as well as relaxing the laws for teachers coming in from other states. Because they used to have it where you had to jump through the same amount of hoops when you'd already been certified in another state. So why can't that transfer over? So we were actually pretty pleased with the passage of those bills because it did open the door for more access to teachers. We do have a section in the back of the document. I mean, not in the back, but it's like the second ongoing issue, which talks about staffing and recruitment. And we could add a support in there that talks about, again, something related to alternative pathways, or, you know, something like that. What you're talking about, we could find language to put in there to include that.
Yeah, that would be great. And I was very pleased with what they did with certification from different states. That was great. But I think our challenge is the alternative pathways. And speaking as a practicing educator who does that, the in-district pathway that they're having us develop is becoming so arduous that it's almost like they need to go back and do the same thing that we're doing to take the courses in college. When the teachers are already teaching, we just need to give them either credit for the work they're doing, have a higher ed professor come and evaluate what they're doing to make sure that they are up to par, and then probably give them their licensure. So just putting some language in legislature to allow some other alternatives in partnership with higher ed.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to move to Chair Walker.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again, Ms. Welsh, for all the work that you do for us and with us collectively to ensure that this legislative season is amazing. You know, I don't know if there's more to that page. I don't recall seeing a booklet yet. It might be in my email somewhere, but some of the things I know that were really important as well were school safety. Yes, thank you for adding that. Board autonomy and independence. I didn't see that anywhere kind of fleshed in there. Funding for our mandates. I know that that's always intertwined inside, like as bills come. One thing I'm really excited about is as we open up communications with our legislators, we're already starting to have these amazing conversations, but that's something that we definitely want to keep at the forefront of everyone's minds, because we know without fiscal notes, we find ourselves in a lot of discussions and trouble. And then our ongoing educational, I'm going to call them partnerships, but it is whenever there are educational bills that are put in, it's again, that open transparency and communication and ensuring that, you know, especially as we talk curriculum, one of our cores is that we maintain curriculum within our school district. And we want to make sure that legislation doesn't come back on that. So maybe it's going through the booklet last year and just seeing like the highlights so that we can make sure we capture those somewhere.
So I will say that, okay, first of all, if you want to put it into a priority, that's perfectly fine, any one of those items. However, I will say we have whole pages that address everything that you talked about. So,
oh, good. I just didn't see them.
We can maybe look at that. And then if there's anything, I mean, actually, when I brought it to Chair Briggs' attention about having some priorities, he said, well, how are you going to figure out which one's a priority? Because they're all so important, which is it's really a good point to make. So, so we can have a further conversation. So maybe we look at this, and then if you think, well, you know, we still need to make that a priority, we can absolutely do that.
Okay, thank you. You know what? I'm sure as soon as I take a look at it, it's going to be amazing. I thought it was just that one page and I'm like, oh no, we got to have a little bit more in there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to clarify really quickly that there's ongoing priorities, is the term that's used in the booklet that you'll see, when you get a chance to look at it. Gonna go to Board Member Boozer Struther.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for your hard work on this. It is, the booklet is very attractive and telling the story better and better. So I'm noting that, and I want to express my thanks. One thing I do want to say about the legislative priorities page, it's very hard to read, like the formatting, the layout, and it doesn't jump out as like, these are our 4 top talking points for this session. So I would ask that the designers really think about the fact that these are our 4 top points, that we all want to be on task, and make that easier to read. I mean, the actual formatting is extremely difficult to read, not being like, having that the way the words are. So, and no graphics and everything like the rest of the booklet. So if I'm flipping through the book, I'm probably going to skip this page and go look at the great pictures of students and school construction. And so I'd like to see that alignment, and the actual taking in of this, because we're going to be handing this out to everybody. The second is that I do think with the immunizations, it's the delivery method and the healthcare system that's the bigger problem. And later on page what's called 13 of the booklet, where it's mentioned again, it mentions the providing PGCPS LEAs who manage their own professional nurses and have school-based clinics, independent avenues to secure vaccines to students to close the gap on immunization compliance. To me, that should be way at the top. Like if we're going to put vaccines as a main issue, that should absolutely be added to that,
Move
to
it
the
over.
4th column.
We can do that.
So that's my immediate feedback on this thing.
Yeah. And so we're second round, so I'm gonna go to Chair Walker.
I can wait until you do yours, Board Member Briggs.
No, I can wait till the
Okay,
end.
perfect. Thank you. I have, Board Docs wasn't working great for me earlier, so I have opened it up. Thank you very much for that. I can see all of the pages now, which I will go through, but it hits on all of the things that I just mentioned. So thank you, Ms. Welsh. The other point is, and we don't need to battle it now, but regarding vaccinations, I don't think it's mandatory for our scholars to have vaccinations. And I know that the COVID vaccination is not required for our scholars to have. So maybe we just outline what they are, or immunizations is different than vaccinations. So as we look at the literature, as we look at the verbiage, let's just make sure we stay in context of it, because we can just, highlight a couple of things that will get parents up in arms about a couple things. But if I misunderstood that, Board Member Boozer Struthers, I apologize. I just know that all vaccinations aren't required for our scholars.
It's really, in fact, there's a whole page in MSDE that lays out very specifically you're correct. They're very specific ones that children need to have, during, but let me look at that terminology, because maybe we can clarify that a little bit so that it's not, so you don't get confused about, we're talking about you need to have COVID vaccination. We're talking about things like DPT.
Yeah, the big ones.
Yes,
The
okay.
ones the standard ones. Thank you.
Yeah. Board Member Boozer Struther.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Walker. I do get excited about this topic. It's very important to me. But there is a COMAR, and there's a page right off.
There is.
Yeah, so we can reference COMAR 10060403, and we link it right there. We link it, of course, MSDE links it, but it's called Vaccine Requirements for Children. So I agree with you, immunizations, vaccine, those are, that we use both, but there's actually a law on each one that children must have at certain ages an entry into a public school. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. I just want to say, Mrs. Welsh, that I really agree with the layout. I think that that was probably something we talked about internally, was just, I think, making it more intuitive is the feedback that I would give. It, like, obvious, like, you know that those are the 4 pillars. It's like bold, it's something that's bold, is very clear. Maybe there's like a visual or some image that just makes it really easy. I also like the feedback of like making it engaging, because I didn't think about the fact that people would probably go to the pictures first and be like, oh, look at the, like, at the, is that green belt? Like, you know, you're trying to like figure out things and you're not really reading it and you get lost in it. So just making it somewhere where it's logical in some way and you're not like easily confused. And then maybe an appendix. I do think like a place for like terms, just so that there's something that if it's not hyperlinked because it's not a digital document, but someone's actually reading like a physical copy, then they can go and they can say, okay, wait, what are the what are the immunizations again, and what is that requirement? So those are my pieces of feedback. And last thing for Shelby, if possible, I know she's like taking this task on, but from the design stance, if there's some way to make the ongoing, to distinctly make those things separate, because I feel like the reading is those 4 pillars or those 4 things like are big priorities, but they're not our only priorities. And then all the rest of that is like stuff that we continue to care about. So the local autonomy, the special education, charter schools, that's stuff that we're still going to be talking about in Annapolis. And we just want readers to understand that. Like, it's not like we're just saying that those are like 4, and then it's like, what's the rest of this other stuff? So it needs to be, it needs to be clear. It needs to have some type of like way to make that. And I think there is a way to do it. And just wanted to say that.
Okay.
Are there other questions?
Yes,
Just, oh,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Let me raise my hand.
Yeah, because I think you
no,
had,
I didn't raise my hand either, so I was gonna, I'll
well,
yield.
no, because I believe that Chair Walker had a second round. So let's go with you first, and then we'll go to Chair Walker. Dr. Miller.
Mine is just a play on words, and I'm not married to it, but remember when I was talking about the um, what is it called? The teacher pathway to licensure, where you have staffing and recruitment. And I know buzzwords are recruitment and retention. I think that when I think about staffing and recruitment, it seems to me it might be the same, one and the same, even though I think you're talking, when I read through it, that you're talking about mentorship, which is a retention effort. So I'm wondering whether we should change and have retention on there, recruitment and retention, or another word that it's clear this is not just about recruitment, but it's about retaining our workforce.
Okay.
All right. And then Chair Walker.
Yes, thank you so much. Since you're taking feedback, I can avoid an email and give it to you, Ms. Welsh. The first is on page, on the first page, if we could just have my middle initial added E to all of the places, wherever it is.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. The secondary one is, I think, adding on to these 4 core, I kind of like the rhyme of that, but 4 core legislative priorities, just a suggestion. You can take that back to the team. They can decide what they want to do with it. But if we put 1, 2, 3, 4, make that kind of stand out, it goes to what other board members have stated tonight. The thought about just the wording around ongoing PGCPS issues, like maybe we want to say concerns or something around like a synonym for it. They do continue to be large issues, so I don't want to sugarcoat that, but I think that we can maybe take a look at what that phrase looks like for those. And maybe we can number them, not big like the 4 core, but number them so we could see. It'll make it just a little easier to read.
Excuse me, you mean number the actual, like, student welfare has a number, or do you mean number the supports and the opposes?
Oh, no, ongoing PGCPS issues, it says right now, and then local school board autonomy would be 1, staffing and recruitment might be 2.
Okay, got it.
All the ones that say on the same title, ongoing PGCPS, something other than issues, or whatever they come up with. I love that. And then I love the idea that Mr. Briggs gave about kind of separating out the different aspects. So then it goes to PGCPS program highlights, which is awesome. So thank you. I think that those big core things really stand out as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
And I don't know if we say anywhere, I don't know that it's necessary, but we could put it at the bottom, maybe thank you to our legislative support throughout the course of the year, not only these 90 days, but we know that we're not revenue generating. So we want to make sure that we not only verbalize it, but if there's anywhere we could put it in print, I think that that's value added as well.
okay.
Thank you so much. And there's space at the bottom page.
Can I offer, um, I wanted to just make a statement, and this really wasn't about the platform, but this might just be my personal opinion. So I'm just maybe saying this for the record, but I think like I really appreciate the point of appreciating our legislators. I think when we say we're not revenue generating, it could for me it could feel like those are like private dollars, like you're giving us money that we otherwise wouldn't have, but these are public dollars, these are taxpayer dollars, and this is for a public institution. So I don't want to like I wouldn't want it to be misconstrued that it's like we're saying like we're really happy that you're giving us something that you have to, like you're mandated to like give us money. So but if it was a private corporation or something, then it's like, thank you for giving us money that we're not owed, but you are giving us money that this is money that you have to give us. And so the goal is like that you're using those dollars in effective ways. And I just want to make sure that's clear in that we're not miscommunicating that. And I don't think that's the intent, but I just want to make sure that it's not misconstrued.
However they choose to word it, I think it's amazing. I know that we don't go out and for 90 days and push. So however, to your point, the right words are to put it, I think it's value added. Perfect.
Are there other questions? All right, so if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend the legislative platform to the full board for consideration. There being no objections, the legislative platform will be recommended to the full board for consideration. We're now going to move on to item 4.0, policies for first consideration. So there are now 6 items for discussion. We'll have 2 rounds per discussion and vote for a 3rd round if necessary. Each discussion round will be 2.5 minutes per member. So we're going to move to item 4.1, policy 8265, evaluating the superintendent of schools. I recognize Mrs. Welsh for an update on policy 8265, evaluating the superintendent of schools.
Okay, Cindy, do you mind putting the policy up, please? So this is we did have this policy 8265, and we did also have a policy 9265, which was a bylaw, but that was one sentence. All it said was you're going to evaluate the board each year. So and I flip-flopped it because we want to eventually get rid of this 9,000 numbers, move everything over to internal policies or wherever they may belong, and just then eliminate that whole list that the ones that are just sitting there as bylaws right now, but they're not, they're really, many of them are just internal policies. So I did end up making revisions to 8265 because that did have a little bit more information as it relates to the evaluation of the superintendent. So it does say that the Board of Education will evaluate the superintendent annually. And then this is the purpose of the policy is to provide guidelines for how, what, and when the superintendent will be evaluated by the board. And so then if you scroll down a little bit, Cindy, I do have definitions. One is artifacts, because the policy, as we go through it, you'll see refers to artifacts, meaning that they are things like written records, documents produced by the superintendent as part of the job responsibilities, maybe also board meeting minutes, articles written for publication, PowerPoint notes from presentations, agenda from meetings, recordings of press conferences, things like that might be artifacts. And then indicators of goal and expectation attainment might be including documentation such as multiple valid and reliable data sources, a direct observation of the superintendent by board members, client surveys, and then again, referring to the artifacts. And then your performance goals, these would consist of measurable goals with specific timelines for the achievement that are aimed at desirable yet realistic improvement targets that align with Prince George's County's public schools needs and or concerns. And then the standards would consist of, and if you'll scroll down, Cindy, First of all, annually, prior to the beginning of the school year, the superintendent and the board chair shall meet to agree on the format, evaluation instrument, and annual performance goals for the superintendent's annual evaluation. The board shall approve the evaluation instrument. So that would be the first standard. And then if you scroll down a little bit further, no later than January 30th of each year, the board will provide the superintendent with an informal review of the superintendent's progress of meeting the agreed upon performance goals, the performance of job description expectations, and the implementation of board policies by reviewing the indicators of goal and expectation attainment. So you're really looking at three things. One is whatever goals that was agreed upon that the superintendent will be working on for that year, as well as what's in his job expectations that required, and then the implementation of board policies, because we have board policies. Number one, we have a good number of board policies that talk about the superintendent implementing administrative procedures, and then they actually go into more detail. Like, for example, like annual reports, like we just talked about field trips. There's one for bullying. I mean, there's lots of different reports that the superintendent's required to provide. There's lots of things the superintendent is just responsible for as you look at what your policies are. So I feel like these are important pieces to consider in that process. Then C, no later than June 30th of each year, the board shall formally evaluate in writing the performance of the superintendent. The evaluation shall be based on a review of the indicators of goal and expectation attainment of the performance expectations as detailed in the superintendent's job description, the agreed upon performance goals, and the implementation of board policies. Then D, the superintendent shall develop a plan of action to support goal achievement. The plan will include an annual timeline for goal attainment based upon indicators of annual progress. Then E, the board shall provide the superintendent with a copy of the completed evaluation within 30 calendar days following conclusion of the annual evaluation conference. The superintendent shall have the right to respond to the board's written evaluation either orally during closed session or in writing. The evaluation of the superintendent and substantive information considered by the board in completing the evaluation shall be considered confidential. Then F, the board council shall serve as a resource for the board in the evaluation of the superintendent, including but not limited to receiving and compiling individual board members' evaluations. Then G, the end of the year evaluation conference shall include a review of the superintendent's performance with regard to meeting the agreed upon performance goals and performance expectations defined in the job description and implementation of the policy. The composite evaluation shall represent the consensus of the board. The evaluation conference shall occur as an agenda item for executive session. And then H, the board chair and each board member shall sign the annual summative evaluation at the time of the conference unless changes must be made as agreed upon by the full board. Superintendent may include a written statement. The superintendent shall sign the evaluation within 5 working days. And then the board shall implement this policy. Now, please feel free to make whatever changes you want. I don't know what process you have in place already to evaluate. I merely was going off of what you had in 8265 previously. And then just researching, I looked at some other school systems evaluation material, as well as different organizations like AASA and recommendations for things that should be considered for when you're evaluating the superintendent.
Thanks so much, Mrs. Welsh. The floor is now open for questions. Your hand will be recognized in the order of it being raised. We're going to go to Board Member Boozer Struther first.
Thanks. The policy and how we're operating with the current superintendent contract, which is a public document from June 2023, is aligned to a November 1 of each year as the start. That's in the contract. But I guess for the policy, I mean, should have this contract followed the policy of that annual review is by what date? January?
The annual review is by June 30th. So you're wrapping up that school year.
By June 30th. Yeah, they're not aligned. So I don't know if there's a provision around except otherwise agreed in a contract. I mean, because right now they're not aligned.
So I actually was looking for the contract because I thought maybe we publicized that contract. I know in another school system I worked in that was public, it was right out there so everyone could see the entire contract. And for some reason I could not find it. And when I went into board docs, all the all the information for previous board meetings were disappeared. I don't know why. So I wasn't able to pull it up, but if that's exactly what I wanted to look at to identify what you had already agreed upon in the contract.
Yeah, it's search, when you use the search function in board docs, if you search Millard House contract, you can find it. It's
Okay.
BOE-Millard House, and it's June of 2023.
Okay.
Great. Are there additional pieces, Board Member Strother?
No, I just wanted to call out the fact that the
Thanks.
contract doesn't have the same alignment. I didn't know if the policy should say unless otherwise contracted between the board and the superintendent to cover discrepancies in that date. And I think Mr. Farrar could probably be helpful with that as well.
Great. We're going to go to Chair Walker.
Yes, I would agree. Thanks, Pam, for bringing that up. I do think that we should have that stipulation there. There's probably a number of reasons why, depending on pay and all of the things where dates are done. So I think it's exactly as you said, if otherwise stated in a contract, that we actually align to. I'll pause for coming back the second round. I'm still just reading a couple things I wanted to make notes on. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions for round one? I guess that would really just be Dr. Miller, myself. All right, well, I think we can go to round two, and I know that you mentioned you have questions, so if you're ready, Chair Walker, we can go to you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to just take another read of this and I will add it to the tracker for updates. Thanks so much.
Thank you for that. So assuming that there are no substantive changes that we wouldn't agree with, whatever's going to be in the tracker, if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend policy 8265 to the superintendent for revision or approval as we read it here. So this isn't with any inclusions.
Can I ask a question that you've referenced the tracker a couple times now tonight? So where is the tracker? So if Chair Walker does put statement comments in terms of something that she feels needs to be changed, how do I get that information? Because I don't know what the tracker is.
No problem. No, were you going to answer, Jonathan?
No, you. I think
Okay, no worries. So our tracker, so our board, one, we need to make sure that you are able to be assigned in there. But what happens is that we have this action tracker. And so the board staff will put any questions or concerns or anything that comes from the community or maybe comes out of here. And then what happens is then it gets assigned to a person. So Robin, you probably haven't been yet assigned, soon to come, but I'm sure that they can assign you and then it will come to your email. Then you would respond to it. And then it then comes back to me if I'm the person who originally put it in so that I can get that answer. The benefit of that is that one, it keeps all of our answers together at one in case there's other board members who want to take a look at it. Two, it also ensures the continuity and accountability of actually getting the answer responded back to. And three, it should cut down 85 million emails coming to you for the same topic when we can just reference the tracker. And I know Ravel, it has his hand raised, so he'll probably add a little bit more where I fell short.
Sure.
When
Ravel,
recognized by Mr. Briggs.
you want to add in there, Ravel? Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yes, thank you. The only thing I will add is that the only people who can be assigned in the tracker are chiefs. And so if we had an action item for you, Robin, then it would go to Chief Boyd and then she would assign it to you.
Oh, okay.
Great.
Mr. Briggs, I did have a question about H before. I could send it in the tracker or I could just ask it here. Which would you prefer?
Well, right now we had on the floor if there were no objections to the policy, and then I think you added in that piece to the tracker. So we can go back a step, and if you just
Okay, well then I object so that I can say this real quick. Okay, in letter H, it says the board chair and each board member shall sign the annual summative evaluation at the time of the conference. And so with this, does that just mean just the people who are there, or does it mean that everyone on the total board needs to sign it at some point? Oh, maybe I can just recommend the answer.
You
Okay,
can
I
recommend the
recommend
answer.
that the answer is at the time of well, I guess maybe it's implied at the time of conference. I'm saying for those people that are actually there, only because I just wouldn't want to hold that up because we clearly have to have quorum in order to vote. So we'll at least have our 6 and maybe those 6 folks can sign it. Likely we'll have input from everyone because we get input already, but if we can just somehow make it really clear that it's those folks that's signing it. Was it clear to you guys? It says the board chair and each board member shall sign the annual summative evaluation at the time of the conference unless changes must be made upon. So at the time of conference, I guess that insinuates that it is the quorum that's there, right? Did you guys read it like that?
Or some meeting.
No, I read as the full board.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So my recommendation would be that those that are currently there, knowing that there's going to be a quorum already, because that's the only way we can vote, that those folks sign it.
Okay.
I guess we can talk about that. My concern of having each person on the board sign it is if they weren't there, it might elongate the process. But we know that we had a quorum who was there that day in order to give the full feedback. So I'd love to hear board members' recommendations, but that would be my reco.
There are questions to the suggestion. I'm going to go to board member Boozer Strother, then Vice Chair Miller.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I could read it both ways. I think I assumed it was who was in the conference. So the board members present would sign it. That if you're a board member and you weren't present, then you don't, you missed your opportunity.
I'll clarify that.
All right, and Vice Chair Miller.
I was actually going back, and I do agree with Board Chair Lolita Walker and my colleague Pam Boozer Strother. The only part that I'm kind of grappling with is because the full board employee is the superintendent. If we don't all sign it, will it mean that it could be nullified? That's the only thing that I grapple with. But I do agree that if you're not there, we don't want it to take a month before we get it all signed off by everybody. That's the piece. I'm okay with by the end of the week everybody's signature, but we can't guarantee that.
Well, can I just interject maybe before we get into dialogue? I'm wondering, I think sign off is subjective. And so a sign off could be in writing, you say something via email, you have a person that responds back. Let's say a person is with child and they can't make it, but they really have strong opinions about it, or they, something happened with the family member. Like, I don't want to create barriers where board members really do want to participate, but for whatever reason, they couldn't. And I wonder if we can get their sign off in a different way so that when we come to conference, we know that everyone signed off on it, to Dr. Miller's point, because I do think that everyone should be saying, yes, I agree with what's in the contents of the contract, but I also agree that we shouldn't be holding up the process. But could we get that sign off in a different way? And maybe that could be just part of internal processes. Chair Walker.
I think the beauty is that the answer is yes, I believe, because the board right now offers a plethora of opportunity to give input. So for instance, for our current superintendent, if you think about the last review and the one that's upcoming, what you'll get is a link that you'll have plenty of time in order to add into each of the objectives that are there. So that's one opportunity to kind of give your input and sign off on your input that's being there. Now that's one type of sign off that could be inside of the process already, because that currently does exist. The board office sends out a link where each board member has the opportunity to give their input, and that is summarized. And then that input is what is given to the superintendent before we go around for ratings. So that is our current process. Now, I think what someone could say is, yes, I did give my input. It was talked there, but then what happens at the end after we give the input, that document isn't changed. That document is then, that feedback document is then attached to the review. So that doesn't go away. So we could potentially use that for people that aren't able to be there as a mechanism for signing off on that. Now, their rating also, don't forget, in there is their rating as well. So they would have put their numbers in, then that number is averaged into where we go forward. So that's an opportunity there I wanted to just remind folks about.
Great, thank you for that, Chair Walker. We're gonna go to Vice Chair Miller.
Okay, I think hopefully I'm not saying the same thing that Chair Walker just said, but we do have opportunity for input prior to the actual day that we're giving the rating. I wonder if the sign off could be, because after that day of the rating, we've given them the feedback that the rating that they're given, I'm gonna say 48 hours. I'm making up a number to just take a look at it and sign off. Because at that point, we're not changing anything. You gave your input before. 48 hours to sign off. Otherwise, after that 48 hours, then we assume consent and we just move forward.
Yeah, I think however we want to vote on it as a board. So it sounds like this discussion is like that can be evolving, and that doesn't have to be in the policy. That can be defined outside of the policy. We have the clarification there. So the question is, oh, I'm sorry.
Can I just ask a question? I think I need to add then, so each, because you just shared a piece of information I wasn't aware of, but each board member does do their own individual rating. So I feel like that needs to be added into this, so that versus just language that talks about consensus. That way you're clear that this is the role of each board member in the evaluation process.
I agree. I think that we have to show some type of accountability, at least ownership, that everyone does have opportunity for sure. That's my personal opinion.
We're gonna go to Vice Chair Miller.
I was gonna piggyback and say the word opportunity, because some may choose not to do it or may not be available, but at least they have the opportunity to do their own rating.
Okay. So the question is, shall the committee recommend policy 8265 to the superintendent for revision approval? Any discussion? Yes, Mrs. Welch.
I'm so sorry. I feel compelled that I would like to pull up the contract and just look at that to ensure that there is alignment throughout this to the contract before we make a final before you all make a final decision, just because it could look very different than when it comes through for action. And I don't want to be sending something through that you then later say, we really want to change this or this, especially if Chair Walker is going to also provide some additional input. I'm just, I don't know. That's just my thought. It might,
You want to pull up the contract?
Well, I want to look at it to make change, see if whatever needs to be realigned. I need to do that language. I mean, I can do it and send it through for action, but you haven't then actually seen.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't care. Whatever you want to do. I'm just trying to think about the process to make sure you have everything you want in this policy, before we move forward with action. That's all.
I want to make sure I understand. I think you might be getting blank stares, not because we don't agree with you. I think maybe for me, I might be trying to understand. Are you asking us for an answer? Like, is that a rhetorical question?
So I guess I'm making a recommendation that maybe it would be wiser to give it another discussion, only because if there are any other substantive changes, we'd want to have that finalized before you move it forward for action.
Okay, I see. Okay.
But it's just a recommendation.
No, then I think we can. Okay, so then that would be still with the question, but I want to go to board member who's instructed before we move forward.
Yeah, all of that makes me think we're not ready for action, that we need this to come back for discussion if that more work needs to be done in that regard. That's all I wanted to say, is that it needs to come back.
So let's vote that way because we're about to vote. So Ms. Adlet, please, we've had discussion to postpone, so please take the roll.
A yes is.
And so I'm sorry. So the question is, shall the committee recommend policy 8265 to the superintendent for revision approval? If you're saying yes, then that means that you're saying let's move it forward. If you're saying no, then that means you're saying let's hold it for further discussion.
Mr. Briggs,
No.
Dr. Miller,
No, it's coming back for further discussion, correct?
Yes.
No.
Ms. Walker,
No.
Ms. Budestrada.
No.
For 4 noes, 0 yeses, motion passes, well, fails.
All right. So, so now I'm going to call for a new question, and the question is: shall the committee postpone policy 8265 to the next policy and governance committee meeting? Ms. Adelaide, please call the roll. An affirmative vote would be yes. We would be bringing back to the next committee meeting. A no would be no, let's not bring it back to the next committee meeting.
Dr. Briggs,
Yes.
Dr. Miller,
Yeah.
Ms. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Booth-Estrada,
Yes.
4 in the affirmative, the motion passes.
Great. So policy 8265, evaluating the superintendent of schools, will be brought back to the next policy and governance committee meeting for further discussion. We're now going to move on to item 4.2, policy 8101, policy development. I recognize Mrs. Welsh for an update on policy 8101, policy development.
Cindy, do you mind posting it, please? So the first thing, this is. Okay, this looks different than what mine is. Maybe I printed out a different one. Let's see. Okay, let's look at this. Anyway, this is the previous one had lines through it that talked about the policy. It was we didn't have it aligned to the same purpose like how we have our structure set up now. So I had to reorganize it and add in some language, you know, take out chief executive officer, put in superintendent, and then also I added local laws and regulations, but that statement comes from the previous policy as well as the purpose, which was to provide a uniform format for policies and establish the processes for policies are developed, implemented, monitored, evaluated, reviewed, and updated. And then definitions are pretty much the same definitions that you had before. I did make a couple changes. So if you scroll down, Cindy, through the definitions, keep proceeding. These were there before, so if you keep going down. So then amendment, I did add amendments, substantive changes to a policy, and then non-substantive amendments. But the reason I added that was because Mr. Swift had said we shouldn't use the word change, but we should use the word amend. So then instead of referencing changes, we'd be referencing amendments. So that's why I put that language in there. As far as the definition for policy, I did originally it said a written document adopted by the board that furthers the visions, missions, and values of PGS and guides the development, implementation of educational programs and systems. I did provide a little bit more information there, talking about the vision, mission, and values, but also that the board exercises its leadership role through the formulation and adoption of policies, and the board policies guide the overall development and implementation of the educational and operational programs and are consistent with the board's long-term goals and objectives. And then just the change with instead of changes, it was amendment. And then if you proceed further, Cindy, okay, and then we get into the standards. So the first one is all policy development revisions activities will adhere to the process detailed in this policy. And then we have, this was what we had previously, which was that how does the policy get on the list basically to be addressed or to be developed? And it's through recommendation of the full board, any board committee or board authorized focus work group, which, like, for example, good example, last year, PCAC, they definitely wanted to have both the parent engagement policy as well as the PCAC policy revised, and they were instrumental in making sure it was on the list for policies. So that's example. And then any board member can ask the chair of the Policy and Governance Committee with a copy to the board chair and the director of the board office. They would like either a development of a new policy revision. And then if you scroll down further, Cindy, and then the superintendent is to also comply with the established policy development activities. And so this was language that was there before. It says all board policies will be reviewed within a 7-year cycle. So we have been working hard to try to update policies that are from the 2000 to 2010 group, because we still have a good number of policies that were done back in 2005, 2006, 2007. And I don't know that of any school system that does as many policies as we do. We have really moved a lot of policies through. So, but ideally, I think it's a very good idea that the policies are placed on a cycle so that they don't become outdated, that we can keep them updated. And then when they referenced previously about the established annual policy development activities, this is the part where the superintendent is supposed to present you with an annual report. And then it will include policies that require or are recommended for revision. And if you scroll down, Cindy, and then administrative procedures that require revisions to be in alignment with board policies. And then the last one, if you scroll down, is policies that should be created to align with existing administrative procedures. So there used to be, and I'm not sure why any of my deletes haven't showed up. That's very bizarre. In the document I have, they're there, but you do see all the things I added. So it's sort of strange. But anyway, it previously had also talked about that the superintendent should provide policies that have been reviewed but are not recommended for revision. And since we've been doing this, since this policy went into effect, we never end up providing that information because there really hasn't been any review that have been recommended for revision. So I'm not sure that's very instrumental when we're really looking at which policies should we be putting on the list to be addressing for this upcoming year. And then we have this next one is really pretty much the same language that was there. But I'll scroll back up for a second, Cindy. Then in certain cases outside the regular cycle, policies will require non-substantive, that you say changes, it now says amendment, and the superintendent designee will present the policy containing the non-substantive amendment to Policy and Governance Committee for an action at a regularly scheduled committee meeting. And then the policy committee may recommend to the board to take immediate action on these modified policies. So for example, let's just say there was a change in law or something, and there's a policy that and it's not super substantive. And I can think of one right now. It has to do with, I want to say it's a policy on oversight by the board, and it lays out specifically what the superintendent is responsible and what the Board of Education is responsible for. And in that, where it talks about the superintendent's responsibility, and I just ran across this past week, it says that the superintendent's responsible for consolidating schools. Well, that was before House Bill 1079, when the superintendent was able to close schools. Now the superintendent is not. It is the board who makes that determination. So going into that policy, instead of saying, well, we're going to now review and go through the work of doing major revisions, what this section is really talking about is all we're doing is making a correction so that it's the board that's responsible for the consolidation of schools and not the superintendent. And we really haven't talked about this as a committee, but I'm thinking, and these kinds of things aren't sitting on the work list for the year, but there are things that would be very simple based on this information to make the changes so that it's accurate. So I don't know what your thinking is, but I mean, this has been there forever. So, I think it's good language that we should take advantage of because we haven't. And then policies of the board that should include the following elements, which we have listed here if you scroll down. And then if you continue, so then it says at the beginning of each school year, the Policy and Governance Committee will approve a list of policies to review during the school year with the guidance from the superintendent and director of the board office. The committee chair will report to the full board at the October board business meeting, the list of approved policies to review during the school year. So that's new language. And that was that came from 8100, which actually talks about the fact that the policy committee the chair will provide that information. So I just incorporated that. And then if you scroll down further, the committee chair in collaboration with the vice chair, and I'll stop right there, administration staff and board staff will determine each meeting agenda, because generally speaking, it's usually Chair Briggs, myself, Cindy, and Vice Chair Miller, who are invited to meet to talk about, what the agenda will be for the following meeting. And then once a policy is added to the agenda for discussion, so this is the important piece, and it reflects also what Mr. Swift was talking about. Once a policy added to the agenda for discussion, then the policy sponsor, the superintendent board, blah, 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 will provide the rationale for the recommendation. And what I'd like to do is, as we go through each of these in the future, because you have asked me several times on different policies, well, why did this one get on the list? And 9 times out of 10, I tell you that which is true. It's because it's an old policy and we really need to update it. It's very outdated. But I think it would be helpful just in terms of understanding why are we even looking at the policy, that I can provide that information when we are, when we're doing that, when we're discussing it. And then the rationale for the recommendation, and then amendments to the existing policy, and then administration staff will develop the new policy or amendment or amend an existing policy, which is what we do right now. Then the administration staff and committee shall consider the following factors in the preparation of the draft policies. So this is new language. So if we would, in doing policies, and I do this, I look at Maryland State Board of Education, federal, state, local laws and regulations, court decisions, scroll down, cost implications, which you as a committee frequently have discussed, similar policies of other school systems. I always look to see what other policies are out there, research literature. I'm always looking at other stuff, and the effect on operations and those impacted by the policy. And then the administration staff is responsible for making sure that the draft policy is not in conflict with any of the other board's policies or administrative procedures. Then the next piece, the committee will review the policy and make suggested edits. The policy will then be reviewed by the office of, so that would be like when we're having discussion and we make the final changes, but then it will be reviewed by the Office of General Counsel for Legal Sufficiency and by the superintendent, and the superintendent will provide the committee with a written statement regarding operational impact, legal ramifications of the policy, and provide any suggested changes, which is the memo that he always provides. And then the committee will vote on whether to take action. Now, this is a little bit different, but the committee will vote on whether to take action to seek public comment. If the committee approves seeking public comment on the policy will be posted on PGSBS webpage and publicized for community input for no shorter than 2 weeks. So the difference here is, instead of having to vote and send it to the board to for them then to make with a recommendation to send it out for public comment, you as the committee will make the decision to send it out for public comment and send it out for public comment, because the comments actually come back to the committee to then review the comments and make decisions on whether or not you want to make any revisions to the policy. And by doing it that way, it actually saves time. You don't have to wait to get on a board agenda and then wait for the board to vote on it and then send it out. So you're still getting your public comment. The board office will still publicize it, that it's out for public comment, and make sure people are aware that it's out there. But then you come back, you review the comments, which you do anyway, and then you would make any additional revisions to the policy. And then once you have revised the policy to what you like it, so that the committee says, yep, we're good with this, that's when it would go to the board with the recommendation to adopt the policy. And again, this is based on Mr. Swift's recommendation. And then if recommended, the policy was sent to the full board for consideration. The board shall provide an opportunity for public comment on the proposed policy during the consideration of the policy. So the day that it's like, say on Thursday, you're going to have some policies that the board's going to vote on that policy. The board members community members can certainly provide public comment prior, when the public comment section is. And then you have that information that you might cause you to want to make any changes to the policy. But if you're good with the policy, the full board then just votes on the policy and it's done. So it's not coming back up for first reader or second reader. It's just coming for consideration, which is what he had put into when he gave us, I think he sent Chair Briggs, myself, and Cindy sort of I think of what his recommendations would be for revision. So then if you scroll down, Cindy, and then the board would take action on the proposed policy. So, of course, it provides the community two opportunities to provide any certainly they can always come to any committee meeting and provide public comment. That's the first thing. Secondly, then we have that 2-week public comment section. And then on top of that, when it's to the board for consideration, certainly any, community member can provide public comment during the public comment section of the board meeting. Then, as far as administrative procedures, I did make a couple changes here. Administrative procedures will be submitted to the board within 30 days of the board's enactment of the corresponding policy. Currently, it says concurrently, but because oftentimes there's changes in the policy, even to the point, you've made changes to policies up at the very end. I think it would be wise to at least have that 30-day period so that the AP can reflect any final last-minute changes to the policy. And then, of course, the superintendent is supposed to then, after he does approve the administrative procedure, when they've been reviewed or revised or developed, then he sends them to you so that you get to see them. And your job is really, it's an information item only, but you are also looking to ensure that the administrative procedure does reflect what you are requiring, what you want to see happen. And so you want to make sure there's alignment between the policy and the administrative procedure. Cindy, can you scroll down? And then, we already do this when the board office will then, once the policy has been enacted, the board office will inform the superintendent in writing with the policies have been enacted, and then the superintendent or designee will update the PCPS website to include the newly enacted policies. And then I think that's it. Let's scroll down one more section for implementation responsibilities. Change in CEO to superintendent. The schedule lists the policies. Oh, this is about that just the things the superintendent must do. The schedule which he does provide with any new policies that we need to be addressing for the upcoming year. That was a change from CEO to superintendent. Number 3, the same for 2 and 3. And then number 4, the superintendent's designee is responsible for the publication and maintenance of the board's policy on the PGCPS website. Previously, it said the policy manual, but we don't really have a manual. We just have the website that lists all the policies. So that is that. And then Cindy, is there anything more? And then it just says the superintendent designee in collaboration with the director of the board will develop a process to ensure continuous monitoring of board policies and their implementation and the submission of reports. So like this past summer, myself and Ravel put together a list of all the reports that if you go through all the policies, we have a good number of policies that require the superintendent to provide a report during the school year. Anytime, some start in the beginning of the year, some are like in December, one's in January, it just goes throughout. But there's all these reports that the superintendent should be providing the board. And so we did, the two of us sat down, put the list together, and then I did share that with the superintendent and chief of staff. So with the idea that he will be able to provide you with all of the updated information that you need when it comes to the reports. That's it. I'm sorry for talking so much, but I feel like this is such an important policy. I wanted to make sure that I tried to highlight anything that got changed so that you're aware of everything that's going on right now. And certainly make whatever changes you want to make. You need to go.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation, Mrs. Welsh. We're now going to turn it over to board members for any questions. Okay, I'm going to go to Vice Chair Walker, or I'm sorry, Vice Chair Miller. It looks like you're muted.
I was trying to follow along on the document on board docs, and there was one area where you said that there was a conflict with HB 1079. Can you go back to that one? I couldn't.
So I was saying that there's language in this policy development one that talks about being able to do non-substantive changes without having to go through this lengthy process And I gave an example of, like, for example, where there's a change in the law and the one section where it says and I have to look up that policy number, but it has to do with its oversight, board oversight or whatever. And it specifically says the superintendent is responsible for, actually consolidating the schools. Well, that back then, when that policy was written, which was just a couple years ago, because 1079 is maybe 2 years old, if that was correct, it's no longer corrected. They changed the law to say that the Board of Education is responsible for closing schools and ultimately consolidating the schools. So that would be one that we do. All we're doing is making this particular change for it to be accurate, but it's not open, so, because I know we have so many policies we do need to update. We don't ever really take advantage of that one section in this policy development policy, but maybe we should be starting to do some things like that just to make sure that, if we see something that's not up to date, we update it, but we don't have to go through the extensive process that we do when we're really, truly reviewing a policy.
Only because I lived it, I was gonna say, I thought that the HB 1079 said that the superintendent, or should I say CEO, made the decision on school consolidations. The law stated that, so our policy mirrored that.
At the time when we did that particular policy, yes, it did. But then 1079 came and it actually changed it. So no longer does the superintendent provides a recommendation to the Board of Education, but the Board of Education absolutely makes the final decision.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Miller. Are there other questions? Okay, I just had two really quick comments, Mrs. Welsh. I think I'm not sure if I saw the language in there, but to Vice Chair Miller's point, if we could have something in there that says like just a update to the board when there's a change, a law changes or something, you all make that change. It's good, but it also is important for us to know that. And then I think the other thing I would say is the concurrent piece with the administrative policy. Feel like the board policy drives the administrative policy, so I'm not sure if it's necessary that we have to align ducks because they should be saying what we're saying, and then drawing out the language a bit more. And if they do go against whatever the board policy says, then we would need to clarify that. But I don't know if that needs to be a part of the process per se.
I'm not sure I understand. Say it again. What's
The board policy is the policy that where the administrative policy derives,
Correct.
whatever it's going to say. So when you were saying like that concurrent piece where it's like, well, let's make sure it matches and it helps when we're going through that whole process of like approval by the board. I just wanted to clarify. I'm not sure that that's necessary. If the administrative policy is saying something different than the board policy, then they need to change it. Is how I feel is right. Like the board policy is the policy, and they should be following that.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I absolutely agree. That's why I felt like saying 30 days after would ensure that I can give you a perfect example of the one that has to do with the wellness policy. So here, just as we were working on the wellness policy, the divisions that were responsible for the wellness policy, they actually did their own wellness AP. And so, and it came out at it was right. I mean, they came to us for review at the same time, but guess what? It's nowhere near. So that now it has to go back for a revision and everything to update it. But they weren't, without having a policy in front of them even, and we had a lot, that was one that we had a lot of back and forth discussion. It took us a while to get to that point. So they're moving forward. And that I just think just when you think about timing, it would be better to at least have that finalized policy. And then we say within 30 days, you must have the administrative procedure that goes with it. That will then align with the policy. That's what I was trying to say.
I see. I understand. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? Okay, if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend policy 8101 to the superintendent for revision approval. There being no objections, policy 8101, policy development will be recommended to the superintendent for revision approval. We're now going to move on to item 4.4, policy 5143, bullying, harassment, or intimidation. I recognize Mrs. Welsh for an update on policy 5143, bullying, harassment, or intimidation.
So bullying, harassment, and intimidation, you had several comments at the last board meeting, and I think I went through and highlighted it. These were this came up, not the last board meeting, but the at last year's one of our policy committee meetings. So if you just scroll through it, Cindy, you'll see the changes. These reflect what I did go back and listen to the video, and these changes sort of reflect the changes that it was after Dr. Tisa Holly provided her presentation of the data and everything. Okay, we can stop there. And a couple of the things in the data made us realize, made you all realize that maybe we should have some more specific language in the policy. So one was, when we looked at the data, a lot of the bullying was happening in the classroom. And so I added language to say, and this is about annual professional development, but in addition to everything else that is there, it's also to provide teachers with classroom techniques to prevent and handling bullying in the classroom. Because there's everything about prevalence, causes, consequence of bullying, evidence. It talks about increased use of evidence-based strategies, but sometimes I think they really need some very specific training on actual techniques to really help them when things like that are occurring in the classroom. And then the next thing is conducting let's see, let me read this to see what it is, because it was in relationship to what you had shared. It said conducting regular classroom lessons. Oh, had to do with students. Then the training of students related to bullying and making sure that they understand, that they have an awareness of this and what is bullying and what they can do, those kinds of things. So then I added language about conducting regular classroom lessons on social emotional learning that builds student capacity for self-awareness and management and social awareness, as well as sensitivity and tolerance, including those based on person's ability, cognitive, social, emotional, and physical, ethnicity, race, family structure, language, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, physical attributes, and social economic status. The reason I added all this originally, I know why this came, was because when you looked at the data, there was definitely more students that were receiving special education services were bullied. It was disproportionate, so that students that were receiving special ed services were bullied more frequently than those that were not. And so we're talking about students with disabilities. And so students are getting bullied probably about their ability level, you know, and it could be in any of the developmental areas. But then I started thinking, but these are other factors too, of which students often bully each other about. And so therefore I did expand it to incorporate all of these. But again, it's the idea that we're actually working with the students and talking to them, training them. It's a preventive kind of thing, but to be upfront with them, explaining all this and helping them develop sensitivity and tolerance. And then if you scroll down further, I think there's one other section. Cindy, keep going. Oh, and then I did add that place the Q, because we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the ID badges. It says place a QR code for reporting bullying on the back of the students' identification badges. Which actually, now that I think about this, because Chair Walker in the conversation about the badges actually said we should probably though keep also the I think the website address, because if the cell phone policy the state ends up with a cell phone policy, which basically says you're not allowed to have cell phones at all in the school, then it's not going to be very helpful having a QR code. Then you really are going to want the website address. So I will put that in there also, place the QR code and the website address for the reporting the bullying. And then scroll down, just make sure I didn't miss anything, Cindy. We go back. There's okay. Oh, and then there was I can't remember, some statement about ensuring parents are provided resources. So I did put in provision of information for parents about community health and mental health, community health and mental health resources, so that they would be provided that information if, you know, both basically up front, as well as if there is a situation where their child is either bullied or is the bullier. And then if you scroll down further, I think I got all the comments. Keep going, Cindy. That's it. That was everything. So that really was all the things that were addressed in that policy meeting when you were discussing the bullying.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh, for that. I do want to say that we are at 7:20 and we are going to have a board member that's going to have to hop off at 7:30. So we may have one more policy that we can get through. I know there's spaces, and unfortunately, we always have a laundry list of things, and we had those presentations today, so it did eat up some of the meeting, and then we had to have those discussions. With that being said, there are questions on this policy. Want to make time for that. So board member, okay, so Vice Chair Miller, and then we'll go to other hands.
This is something I can also put on the tracker. In the admin procedure, which I know that is done by administration, I don't see some correlation or somewhere where we could strengthen this policy to ensure that the student who is exhibiting the bullying behavior, because parents, family, or whoever, guardians are to engage to ensure that there's some sort of restorative plan is put into place. I do see where it talks about collaboration with families and community, but it doesn't really ensure that the family and community engage. It gives them an option, so the child may receive punitive measures, but that doesn't help stop the bullying. The punitive measures, while they are given, I think the bigger picture I want to see here is giving the student, or should I say the scholar, whatever he or she needs in order to help them through whatever they're going through that's causing them to bully another student.
You're muted, Mrs. Walsh.
So the student doing the bullying is what you're saying that we would do that for. Okay.
Correct, because it covers the student who's being bullied, and that is paramount, but the goal is to stop the bullying. And in order to stop it so that we don't, another child doesn't suffer, is we need to address the core or the root cause of the problem, which is what can we do to help the student who's exhibiting the bullying behavior?
So you know what, I could add, because if it's in the policy, then it has to be addressed in the AP, and I could add some language that just says something to do with something that would be working with the student who has done the bullying. It's because we do talk about what kinds of trainings and stuff, so we could add, like, I have to think about the language I would use, but I know exactly what you're saying, that I could put that into the policy if everyone was in agreement. I mean, and then the details of it would actually be sitting in the administrative procedure, but this gives you sort of like it gives guidance basically to the people working on the procedure that you need to incorporate specific language on how to work with the student who's bullying.
Thank you. Yeah, working with the student and the family.
Okay.
Great. Are there other questions on this policy? Okay. I just wanted to make one comment, Mrs. Welsh. Again, this is just for consideration, and I know we've got to get through this, but I just want to say I heard you say tolerance, and I know as we're talking about like staying up to date in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, I think they've moved away from using tolerance.
Oh, okay.
And they're like more around acceptance, because you can tolerate someone, but that doesn't mean that you're really truly seeing them.
I'll change that.
That's in a policy, yeah. Okay, so if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend policy 5143 to the superintendent for revision approval. There being no objections, policy 5143, bullying, harassment, or intimidation will be recommended to the superintendent for revision approval. I want to be respectful of time, so as we have 6 minutes and we have the attendance, absence, and truancy policy. Mrs. Welsh, do you think it would be possible to get through that in maybe 4 minutes?
I can talk fast.
Okay. All right.
There's not a lot of changes to it, so I can talk fast as if Cindy can put it up real quick.
Okay, great. And I know this, unfortunately, this is what we're gonna have to do. But we're gonna move to item 4.5, policy 5113, attendance, absence, and truancy. I want to recognize Mrs. Welsh for an update on policy 5113.
Okay. So Cindy, if you scroll down keep going. It'll show up right away. Keep going. Okay. So if I remember correctly, board member Boozer Strother talked about bereavement leave. And actually, in the administrative procedure is a whole section that talks about students who get leave for family members who have passed, but it also includes extended family and close non-relatives. So they actually had gone a little bit further on the administrative procedure, but I think that I'm thinking that goes to what you were talking about in terms of bereavement leave. So that was the one change. And then if you scroll down further, Cindy, keep going. That was just a change from CEO to superintendent. Wait. I saw one little red line here. Let me just see what, okay, same change, keep going. And then, also, I have, in addition to the categories identified in state law, the superintendent is authorized to identify other emergencies or set of circumstances which constitute a good and sufficient cause for absent from school as a lawful absence. So then if you proceed further down here, you'll see one of them, which it used to be that when a student was, okay, stop a minute, stop, go back up for 1 second, Cindy. When a student was actually, he was being charged with a juvenile or adult offense and detained awaiting adjudication, he would then be moved out of the school system and coded as no longer a student in the school system, and he would then be part of DJS. So that's not the case anymore. During that time period, until he's gone through the disposition, he actually is still enrolled in the student's home school as well as DJS facility. So he's dually enrolled. So then if you scroll down, it says then that we are responsible during that time. The whole school shall utilize an attendance code created specifically for this situation for the days that a student is attending the DJS facility. So we're not disenrolling the student. And then the next one is the superintendent, and this goes again to what board member Boozer Strother said. The superintendent is responsible for developing and maintaining a system of accurately recording and reporting student absences, both lawful and unlawful. Then the superintendent's designee shall provide training for all school staff with attendance reporting responsibilities to prevent incorrect reporting of absences. Then schools are required to initiate positive and supportive interventions to students who exhibit behavior indicators of possible future truancy. Parents must be informed about their students' attendance and invited to meet with staff to develop strategies for improvement. And then if you scroll down further, Cindy, that might be it. Keep going. That's it. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to add the citation for that, the new law that talks about the student who's adjudicated. I will put that in. But anyway, I think I captured the changes, but I don't know that for a fact. So, but if we need to add other things, then we can certainly do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh. Now turning it over to my colleagues for any questions. All right, board member Boozer Strother.
Yeah, thanks. And I really appreciate seeing the expand to the data tracking and the positive interventions. So thank you so much for bringing that into this policy. I think when I first brought up the bereavement, and it's interesting because I thought we had already made that expansion of close non-family back in 2022. So I'm curious about that, but but it was more around continuing along the lines of our previous student member of the board colleague who had brought up that the length of time is too short, that many students have to travel out of the country. And so I think that's where I was looking for was the how many days could a student be absent lawfully for bereavement?
And I'm not sure we actually address that's an odd one. Let me look at that because I have to look at the administrative procedure too, because I might have specific language, and I'll look at the number of days they have and then see about extending those days. Because I do know, like for employees, that you have 4 days of bereavement leave, but let's say that you have even like changes, let's say like they don't actually have the ceremony, the services or whatever till like say a week, 2 weeks, whatever later, you can take your bereavement leave whenever you need to, in relation to the person who's passed. So I can absolutely look at that language.
Yeah, I might be thinking of the administrative procedure where some of these details are listed after we did the policy. That might be where I might be merging data from that document. But that I just wanted to clarify that when I brought it up, I was trying to continue something of interest to our former colleague
Okay.
that she felt was very important to students as a student member of the board.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, no other questions there. Are there any additional questions? Okay, so I feel like I'm hearing that there is an objection to moving forward policy 5113, because we want to have it for further consideration. So I'm just going to move through that process. If there are no objections, the committee shall recommend policy 5113 to the superintendent for revision approval. Okay. There be no objections. Policy 5113, attendance, absence, and truancy will be recommended to the superintendent for revision approval. We are at 7:30, and I believe it's Chair Walker, you have to
I
hop.
do. I tried to stay until our ending time of 7, but I do have a meeting at 7:30 that I'm leading. So I do apologize, colleagues, but I do have to run. Thank you. Is there anything that needs to be voted on before I head out? Mr. Briggs?
There are all the other policies, and regardless, we don't have a quorum, so we can't move forward even
Thank you so much.
There's a quorum. There's 3 of us.
Oh, there's 3. Oh, okay, great. Oh, then I made that up. So great. We can keep.
Sorry to interrupt so bluntly. We're still moving here. I
We're
hope
still
we get
moving.
to those next 2 sections where we could move things to the board.
Yes, I think we will get to that. All right. Well, we're gonna keep moving forward. So we're at item 4.6, policy 2566, student identification cards. I recognize Mrs. Welsh for an update on policy 2566, student identification cards.
Okay. Cindy, can you show that one? So I don't know why that is bolded. That's the weirdest thing. It's not bold in mine. That's weird. Anyway, so I did put the web link and the QR code because that was what was provided. And then I did include also, because there was we had a lengthy conversation at the last meeting on this about whether there might be other information the superintendent would want to provide, and therefore we should maybe make sure that if he feels that there's something else that needs to be provided on the back of the student ID card, that it should be there. So I did add the student may have other information printed on the back of the student identification card if deemed necessary. There was conversation though about that you would have that you could scan the card and therefore you could actually pick up all the information about the student, like all the identifying information, student's name, address, telephone number, all that type of information. And I did not include that. And the main reason is because from a confidentiality standpoint, I can tell you that we have employees that lose their ID badge all the time. And so that's our employees who are adults. So the fact that if you had students who actually lose their badges, which I'm thinking that's absolutely a possibility, then it opens the door for anyone to be able to grab that badge and scan it and get information about the student. And we are responsible for ensuring that, that information is kept confidential. And so I feel like it's really putting the student at risk in terms of making it that easy to access that type of information. Secondly, there was a conversation then about because we had a public comment related to what was it? Using the preferred name if the student is LGBTQ and wants to have a preferred name. And then this conversation went back and forth. And then board member Boozer Struther said, well, what about if since we already have a policy that already addresses this, and we do, and why can't we just go ahead and list it as related policy. So I did put that in, I added that, and I want to just read you what the LGBTQ policy says. It says schools shall allow all students and staff to use their chosen or preferred name and gender pronouns that reflect their identity, regardless of whether they have undergone a legal name change process. And PGPS shall ensure that school staff use a student's or staff's preferred name and pronouns consistent with the student's gender identity in its student and staff information systems, except where the school is legally required to use a student's legal name or gender assigned at birth. So that we do have a policy that already addresses that. So absolutely, then the student could do that. And so I did put that policy then and under the other for references, other board policy for that policy 0103 in inclusive environments for LGBTQIA plus people. And those were the last recommended changes from the last board meeting.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh. Questions about concerning this policy? Okay. I just want to make one clarification and then we can move forward. But I think Mrs. Welsh, for the accuracy, I think gender identity and sexual orientation might be different, right? So you could have like a preferred pronoun or a name, but that has nothing to do with your sexual orientation. So I think we might need to just clarify that, because it may not have anything to do with LGBTQIA plus if a person has a different preferred name, or it might be an assumption in that policy that they are LGBTQIA plus.
I think we were responding to the public comment at that point.
Okay.
That was specific. I mean, really, when you get down to it, if a student says, I don't use my first name, I use my middle name, I don't want to be called by that name or something. I mean, generally people do that. They will, use the student's preferred name, which might be totally unrelated to gender.
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to make sure that was clarified. I'm not seeing any other questions. So if there are no objections to the committee recommending policy 2566 to the superintendent for revision approval. Seeing none, that there are no objections, policy 2566 student identification cards will be recommended to the superintendent for revision approval. We're now going to move on to item 4.7, new policy evaluation of library materials. Recognize Mrs. Welsh for an update on new policy evaluation of library materials.
Okay, this is a new policy, and it is it's based on the let me see if I can find it. House Bill 785, Senate Bill 738, which was passed this past legislative session. And it talks about, it's quite an interesting bill, but we'll just go through it and talk about it a little bit. So if you proceed down the policy, we have the statement, the policy statement with the board affirms its responsibility to provide every student with high quality instructional materials, resources, support learning of all students at all classes, all grade levels. And then scroll down a little bit further, Cindy. The board is committed to ensure students and parents and something else. I can't read the top because it just went up just a tad too far. Let me see. The purpose of the board is committed to ensure students, parents, and staff are afforded the opportunity to provide objections. So this is interesting. Not evaluate, but provide objections to materials in the school library media program. And this is all coming directly from that law. Then I have defined library media materials, which is a wide range of materials that our school libraries provide. I did define parent so that instead of just saying parent or guardian, it's, a parent is a natural parent or a legal guardian, or any individual acting as a parent in the absence of a parent or legal guardian. So we had those definitions. And then we start with the standards. And so what it says is that the law says this specifically. So library media materials this is for school libraries, services and resources provided in a school library media program are provided for the interest, information, and instructional support of students and staff of the schools the program serves. Secondly, the library media materials, I got a typo, media materials may not be excluded from the library from the school library solely because of origin, background, or views of the individual who created the material. Then the next one, then this again, this is straight from the law. Library media materials may not be excluded or removed from the catalog of a school library media program because of partisan, ideological, or religious disapproval. And then the next one, this is what the law is requiring. The superintendent designee shall establish a uniform process for students, parents, and staff to submit an objection to library media materials in the school library media program. Then the superintendent designee shall ensure that the review of the library media material that has been objected to will be conducted by a committee, and a timeline shall be established to conduct and conclude the review process of the objection in a timely manner. Then the next thing talks about the committee will provide a written decision regarding the objection. If the person does not accept the decision, they shall have 10 days from the date of the committee's decision to appeal the decision to the superintendent/designee. Then the library media materials shall remain available for use by students and staff until the review and appeal process has concluded. So you still keep that out even though they're objecting. And then this last piece, which again is directly from the law, it says the board may not dismiss, demote, suspend, discipline, reassign, transfer, or otherwise retaliate against a certified library media specialist or school library media program support staff for performing their job duties consistent with the above standards. That's it. And that is in Education Article 4-142. So generally speaking, we do have an administrative procedure that talks about evaluating library materials and made up of a committee that does that evaluation. We don't have a policy that addresses that, but this particular what was in the law is very specific to dealing with objections to the material versus an actual evaluation process for identifying what's in the media center.
Thank
Or
you.
program.
Thank you so much for that, Mrs. Walsh. Questions concerning this new policy, evaluation of library materials? Board Member Booster Strother.
Yeah, I would just, oh wait, I think is this the one with the parent where you define parent again at the top, right?
I do it in definitions, yes.
Yeah, I would ask that you do the same definition you did for field trips, because that one was
Oh, okay.
expansive. And then if that is now the board's official definition of parent, because I don't think I've ever seen it so expansive as I saw it for field trips.
That's interesting, because I actually was going through policies trying to find a definition for parent, and I've never even thought to look into field trips, even though I was working on field trips. So that's interesting. So
yeah, it's much more
can do that.
expansive. It has biological, adoptive, and then I think goes on to like the guardians, custodian, guardian, caregiver, foster parent. So
Not a problem.
because if you just read the field trip definition of parent, now you read this one, you may be left out.
Right.
Like the adoptive parents are now left out. So I just noted that inconsistency.
Okay. Thank you for putting that out.
Other questions or comments? All right. So if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend the new policy to the superintendent for revision approval. There being no objections, new policy evaluation of library materials will be recommended to the superintendent for revision approval. We're now going to move on to item 5.0, policies for second consideration and public comment. There are 3 items for consideration. So we have item 5.1, policy 9100, officers. I recognize Mrs. Welsh for an update of policy 9100, officers. Mrs. Welsh, if there's any way to truncate or consolidate language here, we may still be running against time.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I have the memo here from the superintendent, and basically what it's telling us is that this policy was a consolidation of bylaw 9210, which is chair, bylaw 9220, vice chair, and bylaw 9230, secretary, treasurer, and executive officer. And that it now also includes more definite responsibilities in terms of the board chair, because that was based on the House Bill 1079 that laid out those responsibilities. And then it also includes duties of the vice chair, and then identifies the superintendent as the secretary, treasurer, and executive officer, and the responsibilities of that position. And then the other thing it does, it talks about if there's an absence of the chair at a board meeting, or a temporary unavailability of the chair and the vice chair, or a vacancy in the office of the chair and a vacancy in the office of the vice chair. So that is basically that in a nutshell. There is a couple little bit of just clarifying language changes, like where it says the board shall select other board members to serve in the capacity of the chair and vice chair until the return of the chair or vice chair. But that was added because the decision, because we expanded then to vice chair. So we included that. And then I'm trying to think what else. If you can scroll down, Cindy, I don't think there's any, it's very minor or anything else. Oh, the board will elect a replacement of the chair to serve until the annual meeting, at which time the election of the chair will be held. This is just clarifying language. And then the replacement of the vice chair shall serve until the annual meeting in December, at which time the election of the vice chair will be held. And I think that's it. If you can scroll down quickly, and then I think we're done. That's it.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Welsh. Questions concerning policy 9100 officers? All right, seeing none, if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend policy 9100 to the full board for public comment consideration. There being no objections, policy 9100 officers will be recommended to the full board for public comment consideration. We're now going to move on to to item 5.2, policy 9500, reform governance, pay for performance, rescission. Item 5.3, policy 9265, procedure to evaluate the superintendent rescission. I recognize Mrs. Welsh to provide an update on the policies under agenda item 5.2 and 5.3.
So basically, the reason they were recommended for rescission was because they're redundant. We already have in the code of conduct for the board. I mean, the board's code of conduct, it talks about that particular what policy 9500 actually addresses. So there's that is a redundancy, so we don't need that one, which was originally a bylaw. And then the last one, procedure to evaluate the superintendent, that's being rescinded because we will have the policy of 8. Let me see what it is. 8. I'd have to go back to my pile. But anyway, that policy for the evaluation of the superintendent was one of our very first ones. We don't need to have 2 policies. Again, it would be redundant. So they're being removed being rescinded because they are redundant.
Yeah, and I think we've had so many discussions about this. So if board members have questions, remembering that we've talked about this a bit, please let me know now. Okay. So if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend the policies under agenda item 5.2 and 5.3 to the full board for public comment consideration. There being no objections, the policies under agenda item 5.2 and 5.3 will be recommended to the full board for public comment consideration. We're now going to move on to item 6.0, policies for third consideration. So the 8 items are for consideration. 7 of them will be considered as a consent agenda. The policies were distributed to the general public for comments, and only one received comments. So we're going to move to item 6.1, policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process. Recognize Mrs. Welsh to provide an overview of the public comment response received on policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process.
So there was a comment that came in related to the 4113, which talks about the fact that because we did change it to one special education parent, and this particular parent is requesting that we go back to what the original request was to allow 2 parents to serve on the panel. So that's the main part, and then also remove CSAC training requirement, and instead just say that we let's see, we do request that a community involvement members, including parents, family, be offered the opportunity to attend training sessions provided by credible entities. So those were the 2 comments that I mean, that was the same comment, but 2 items within that comment. They want to change from 1 to 2 to 2 parents of students with disabilities. And then that we would have the remove the CSAC training requirement and instead talk more specifically about the fact they would be offered the opportunity to attend training because they were parents. I will say one thing, the process for when they want to do, when they want to interview, because they're being selected to be on the interview panel. I don't know how quickly that operates, but I don't know that there's time to stop and make sure they're trained before they can be on the interview. It could hold up that process of selecting a principal. Because when they're going through that process, you know, when principals are now becoming, vacancies are becoming open and we got to replace them. I'm not sure how quickly HR moves through that process, but you know, I don't know. I mean, just trying to find training for the parent, and then, you know, I don't know, that could be problematic. I'm just a thought.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Mrs. Welsh. And just want to see if there are any questions concerning the comment or the policy. Board Member Boozer Strother.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm not sure where I apologize if I missed when this training component came up, because to me it seems kind of arbitrary, and I don't even think CCAC has a specific how to sit on a principal selection panel. That doesn't, so I'm a little confused by that and would agree that it seems a little arbitrary to think the parent couldn't sit on the panel without whatever panelist training one would be given. And it does feel like I agree, like what happened to, you know, other parents on the panel? So I thought the idea was that there were more than one, and one would specifically need to be parent of a student requiring special education services. So it seemed like we started with multiple. And so I'm only looking at the revised copy, and I have to pull up the old one, but it seems like something got lost there. I think it was two, and at least one should be parent of special education student, was what I thought the request had been of us.
The original request said 2 parents, but then but there's supposed to be other parents also that are on the committee, because it's parents of that school community that are there, and then we had to decide on one parent instead of one parent of a special education student, in addition to the other parents. But now I want to pull up that language, because I didn't.
I don't see any reference to parents otherwise. That's where I'm confused.
Okay. Because it should absolutely say that.
Oh. Well, I know we have 20 seconds left.
Shall have established procedures, in addition to other entities and then stakeholders. At least one of the stakeholders should be. Okay, so they're talking about stakeholders, and it says stakeholders include school-specific staff, parents, community members, and high school students. This is merely saying that one of those stakeholders will be a parent of a student receiving special education or Section 504 services. And we can certainly take the CCAT language out of there, but because it's referencing stakeholders, the interviewing process shall include in addition to interview activities and interview panel of stakeholders. It's saying it doesn't say how many parents, it just says include school-specific staff, parents, community members, and high school students. And I would think a lot of that would be dependent also on the size of the school and everything too. You know, our schools have like 2,000 students compared to a school that has, you know, maybe 300 students is very different. But I don't think the intention there is to say we're not going to have any other parents but the parent of the special education student, because within that definition, it's very clear that it's school-specific staff, parents, and community members and the students.
Mm-hmm. I want to go to, I don't know if the question was fully answered, but I do to Board Member Boozer Strother's liking, but I think we're out of time. We can come to a second round. I'm going to go to Dr. Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you. I was just making sure, Robin Welsh, were you reading the admin procedure or the policy? Because I'm looking at the policy and it just says stakeholders.
Correct, I am. I'm saying that the stakeholders is defined as it includes school-specific staff, parents, community members, and high school students. So it's not saying how many parents, it's just referencing that you're in that panel, you're gonna have is made up of stakeholders, which include parents. So it's not saying anything, the only thing, and prior to adding the language about the parent of a special ed student or a student receiving section 504 services, that we didn't even have that there. So it was just assumed it could be any number of parents or, students or community members. So in this instance, now we're saying of the parents that are going to be on the panel, one of them needs to be a parent of a student that receives special ed or 504 services.
It doesn't necessarily say, it says stakeholders, but it doesn't, and the special education representation should be there, but what about a parent of, another parent? It doesn't specify that.
But the definition does. So stakeholders itself references, I mean, we can put any kind of clarifying language you want. It does say include specific staff, parents, and community members. So when you see the word stakeholder in the language, it means that you're going to have parents, and one of those parents are going to be a parent of a special education student. But you could have any number of parents. It doesn't specify the number of parents, but it doesn't mean it's just only the parent of the special ed student. But if you think we should have some kind of clarifying language, we can certainly do that.
We still have 37 seconds, Vice Chair Miller.
No, I just wanted to make sure that it was inclusive, and knowing that as a parent of a special education student, this is important to me and other stakeholders in my community, but I also want to make sure that all parents feel included in this policy, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, I can get rid of the definition and just write the entire definition out in that D so that it's saying parent, if that you think that makes it more clear.
So because we're at time, we're going to go to Board Member Boozer Strother for a second round.
Yeah, thanks. And, I think because I've experienced this and knew that multiple parents were on this. So I went to the AP, and I think this is once again one of those situations where the AP continues on and clarifies. So in the AP, there's 7 groups invited and 4 are school-specific community members. So that's where parents come out of those 4. There's a lot of staff in here, and the high school students for high schools, but maybe the stakeholders need to list parents of students with special education services, and then it becomes more clear that at least one of the stakeholders shall be a parent of a student receiving special education or 504 services, period.
Okay.
And so that way you've got this particular stakeholder is named, and then there's an extra policy for the stakeholder. Does that help? Would that help?
My understanding, sorry, maybe I can't. That's Pam's, sorry.
What?
Who's this, Travis?
If you would like
No,
for
I wanted just to be clear, because I think I agree with what you're saying. So the stakeholder is a stakeholder in the community, but being specific about, in addition, there will be a parent or a stakeholder with a child who receives special education services, correct?
Well, that particular stakeholder isn't named. So parent of a student receiving special education services 504 plan becomes now in the list of stakeholders. And then that particular stakeholder has additional policy that they must be represented. That I'm trying to figure it out without it having to say the AP, because the AP goes in to say how many of each.
Got it.
So what we would do is then just say this includes school-specific staff, parents, including a parent of a student with receiving special ed or 504 services, and then community members, high school students, blah, 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 which implies that it's their parents, but one of those parents are going to be a parent of a student receiving special ed or 504 services. Is that what you're Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, but E codifies that that one has to be on the panel. So
And
then,
it does, yes.
yeah,
Yes, yes, okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to throw any additional confusion here, but I just wanted to say I think what I heard from the constituent that wrote in was at least 2 for representation, which I think I do like the idea of if you have a group of 8 parents and only one is a parent of a child with a disability or special education needs. I do think representation wise, it would be good to at least have 2 out of that, assuming that there might not be more. There may be more, but I would think that the threshold would be at least 2 is what I would. I think it felt right to me when I was reading it, and I appreciate the suggestion that she made. In addition to what my colleague shared, are there any other questions or comments? All right, if there are no objections, the committee shall recommend policy 4113 to the full board for first consideration. There being no objections, policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process will be recommended to the full board for first consideration.
And we
Yep.
are going to add 2 special ed parents, right?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Oh, and you know what? Well, we can move forward because we didn't have any objections. But there was the pin in the training piece that I believe board member Boozer-Strother was mentioning.
Oh.
It was like that training was not required, and right now it's saying that it has to be with CCAG, but they're not an authorized body to do that, and so there might be that option for like outside trainings from kind of authoritative bodies that exist. So I feel like that means we're going back, and that's fine. But I do want to recognize board member Boozer-Strother if you have a comment on policy 41.
yeah, I think what I don't understand is what is the training? When you're on a panel, all of you are trained to be on that panel to select a principal. I just find it arbitrary. I'm very confused by it.
I
You
think
know what? I'm sorry, can I interject? I do know that Dr. Miller has to go, and I think we're like right at the finish line. We have just literally so I think if we can get through that, we can have that conversation offline. There are items 6.2 through 6.8. So that's policy 8100, Board of Education standing committees and focus work groups. Item 6.3, policy 9210, chair rescission. Policy 9220, vice chair rescission. Policy 9230, secretaries, treasurer, and executive officer rescission. Policy 9270, actions by individual board members rescission. Policy 9361, meetings, time and place rescission. Policy 9367, meetings, quorum, and adoption of formal action rescission. There are no objections. The committee shall recommend the policies under agenda items 6.2 through 6.8 to the full board for first consideration. Okay, there are no objections. The policies under agenda item 6.2 through 6.8 will be recommended to the full board for first consideration. We're now going to move to close.
Wait, I'm so sorry, and I know you want to rush, but I have to bring this back to this thing about the parents, because what the comment is saying that all the parents and community members are going to be offered the opportunity to attend training about special ed disabilities before they're on the panel. So I think that's they're offered the opportunity. I have to say, from an administration standpoint, that is really burdensome to be able to move forward in the process of interviewing principals. I agree. I think it would be very wise, and I'm sure they do it, that they bring the parents in and the community members and whoever to talk about the interview process and what they're supposed to be looking for and blah, 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 all that stuff. But this particular comment's asking for us to change it so that basically of the stakeholders are going to receive training related to students with disabilities.
Are there considerations for policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process, to not move that forward for first consideration?
It looks like we still need to have some more discussion on this to make sure that,
There you go. Okay. So the question is, shall the committee recommend policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process, to the full board for first consideration? Any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Adelaide, we're going to take a roll call again. Saying yes is moving it forward for first consideration. Saying no is not moving it forward for first consideration, having continued discussion.
Mr. Briggs,
No.
Dr. Miller,
no,
Ms. Buzestrada,
No.
Right. So
three
I
in
know-
the negative, motion fails.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I call for the new question. The question is, shall the committee postpone policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process, to the next policy and governance committee meeting? Ms. Adelaide, please call the roll.
Mr. Briggs,
Yes.
Dr. Miller,
yes,
Ms. Buzestrada,
Yes.
three in the affirmative, motion passes.
Great. Policy 4113, community involvement in the principal selection process, will be postponed until the next policy and governance committee meeting. We're now
Thank
at
you.
item 7.0. Thank you. Closing remarks from the chair and adjournment. So the next virtual policy and governance committee meeting will be on November 12th, 2024. Please continue to check the Prince George's County Board of Education webpage for meeting information and updates. There being no further business, thank you all so much for the great discussion. Thank you for sticking around if you have other obligations. The time is now 8:06 p.m. and the October 22nd, 2024 Policy and Governance Committee meeting is adjourned.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, you all. Hey, Robin, can you?
Yeah, I can stay on.
So I think we need to